In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a charming stranger, Victor Lang, hides a sinister secret. He's a ruthless racketeer running an illegal gambling empire. When young Tom Carter falls into debt and danger, Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, weaves a daring plan. Using gossip, guile, and a grand village gala, she lures Lang into a trap, exposing his crimes and saving her community in a thrilling 14-chapter mystery that proves no villain can outwit Miss Marple's quiet genius. Chapter 1. A Shadow in St. Mary Mead. The late summer sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the high street, dappling the cobblestones with patches of light. The village, nestled in the gentle hills of the English countryside, was a picture of tranquility, its thatched cottages and neatly trimmed hedgerows exuding an air of timeless calm. Yet, beneath this serene surface, a faint ripple of unease had begun to stir. Like a breeze disturbing the still waters of a pond, Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window of her modest cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. From her vantage point, she could see the comings and goings of the village Mrs. Price bustling into the post office, young Tommy Pierce darting across the lane with a football, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, pausing to tip his hat to a passing neighbor. It was a scene Miss Marple had observed for decades, each movement as familiar as the stitches in her knitting. But today, her sharp eyes caught something new, a sleek black car, its polished surface gleaming unnaturally in the rustic setting, gliding slowly down the high street before disappearing around the bend toward. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. She adjusted her spectacles and leaned slightly closer to the window, her curiosity piqued. The car was not one she recognized, and in St. Mary Mead, unfamiliar vehicles were as rare as a storm in July. She made a mental note of its appearance, long, low, with tinted windows that suggested a certain secrecy, and resumed her knitting, though her mind was no longer on the wool. Later that morning, Miss Marple decided to take her usual stroll to the village shop, a ritual that allowed her to keep a gentle pulse on the community's affairs. The shop, run by the ever-talkative Mrs. Weatherby, was the heart of St. Mary Mead's gossip, a place where news flowed as freely as the tea at the vicarage. As Miss Marple stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, and Mrs. Weatherby looked up from behind the counter, her round face breaking into a smile. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lovely day, isn't it? Though I dare say it's a bit warm for September." "Indeed it is, Mrs. Weatherby," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but clear, with that gentle cadence that invited confidence. She selected a tin of biscuits from the shelf and placed it on the counter, her eyes scanning the shop. A small cluster of women stood near the tinned goods, their voices hushed but animated. Miss Marple's ears, finely tuned to the nuances of conversation, caught fragments of their exchange. "New fellow in town, you know, moved into the manor. Heard he's got money, lots of it, but nobody knows where from. Charming, they say, but there's something about him." Miss Marple's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She turned to Mrs. Weatherby, who was already leaning forward, eager to share. "I couldn't help but overhear," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "Is there a new resident in St. Mary Mead?" Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed with the delight of imparting news. "Oh yes, Miss Marple. A Mr. Victor Lang, they call him. Took up residence at the old manor just last week. Came in here yesterday, all smiles and fine manners, buying up half the shop for his staff. Paid in cash, mind you, crisp notes, straight from his wallet. Said he's in business, something to do with investments. But, she lowered her voice, glancing toward the women by the tinned goods. There's talk he's not all he seems. Mrs. Price swears she saw him in London once, at a fancy club, with some rather unsavory types. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her fingers resting lightly on the counter. How interesting, she murmured. And what does the village make of him? Mrs. Weatherby shrugged. Some think he's a breath of fresh air, generous, you know, promising to fund the church roof repairs. But others, well, they're not so sure. Young Elsie Carter was in here this morning, looking pale as a ghost. Said her brother Tom's been acting strange ever since he started visiting that new gambling parlor in Dannemouth. She thinks it's got something to do with Mr. Lang. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained serene. A gambling parlor, you say, in Dannemouth? Yes, opened just a month ago, Mrs. Weatherby replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. They say it's all very discreet, but everyone knows it's not quite legal. Tom Carter's been spending every night there, and Elsie says he's in debt up to his ears. Poor girl's beside herself. Miss Marple paid for her biscuits and stepped back into the sunlight, her mind already piecing together the fragments of information. Victor Lang, a charming businessman with a mysterious fortune, a gambling parlor in Dannemouth, and a young man in trouble. It was a puzzle, and Miss Marple had always been fond of puzzles. As she walked home, her steps slow and deliberate, she recalled a similar case from years ago, when a smooth-talking stranger had come to her uncle's parish, promising prosperity, but leaving ruin in his wake. Human nature, she thought, never changed. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair with a cup of tea and her knitting, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was about to reach for her notebook when the postman, Mr. Dobbs, knocked at the door. "Letter for you, Miss Marple," he said, handing her a pale cream envelope with familiar handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Dobbs," she said, her eyes lighting up as she recognized the script. It was from Dolly Bantry, her old friend from Gossington Hall. Miss Marple opened the letter carefully, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. The message was brief but urgent. "Dear Jane, I must see you at once. There's trouble brewing, and I fear it's connected to that new man in the village, Victor Lang. Arthur's heard things, disturbing things. Can you come to Gossington tomorrow? I'll explain everything. Yours, Dolly." Miss Marple set the letter down, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Dolly Bantry was not one to exaggerate, and if she was troubled, there was good reason. The mention of Victor Lang confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions. This was no ordinary newcomer. She sipped her tea, her mind already turning over the possibilities. A racketeer, Mrs. Weatherby had implied, though she hadn't used the word. Extortion, illegal gambling, perhaps even worse. Miss Marple had seen such men before, men who hid their ruthlessness behind a veneer of charm, men who preyed on the weaknesses of others. As the afternoon faded into evening, Miss Marple took a turn in her garden, her eyes lingering on the roses she had tended for years. The village was quiet now, the black car nowhere in sight, but she felt the weight of something ominous settling over St. Mary Mead. She thought of young Tom Carter, caught in the web of a gambling debt, and of Elsie, whose fear had been palpable in Mrs. Weatherby's description. And then there was Victor Lang, a man whose name was already synonymous with whispers and suspicion. Miss Marple returned to her cottage as the first stars appeared in the sky. She lit a small fire in the grate and sat down with her knitting, but her thoughts were far from idle. She considered the nature of a racketeer, a man who thrived on control, who manipulated others through fear and greed. Such a man would be clever, but not infallible. He would have weaknesses, blind spots, perhaps an overconfidence born of past successes. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. She had dealt with such men before, and she knew that the key to unraveling their schemes lay in understanding the people around them, the victims, the accomplices, the unwitting pawns. The next morning, Miss Marple dressed carefully, choosing a simple gray dress and her best hat, a black felt affair with a small cluster of violets. She took the bus to Gossington Hall, a short journey that gave her time to reflect. The hall, a grand but slightly faded manor, stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its sprawling grounds a testament to the Bantry family's long history in the village. Dolly Bantry greeted her at the door, her face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Jane, thank heavens you're here," Dolly said, ushering her into the drawing room. "I didn't want to write too much in the letter, but I'm at my wit's end. Arthur's been talking to an old friend from the Home Office, and he says this Victor Lang is bad news. Very bad news." Miss Marple settled into a plush armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Tell me everything, Dolly," she said, her voice calm but expectant. Dolly paced the room, her hands gesturing animatedly. "It started a few weeks ago, when Arthur got a call from Inspector Racketeer. Remember him, don't you? He's retired now, but he still keeps his ear to the ground. Apparently, Lang's name came up in connection with some trouble in London. Extortion, illegal betting, that sort of thing. They can't pin anything on him, he's too clever for that. But Craddock says he's dangerous, and now he's here in our village, throwing money around like it's nothing." Miss Marple listened intently, her eyes fixed on Dolly's face. "And what does Colonel Bantry think?" she asked. "Arthur's furious," Dolly replied. "He says Lang's got no business in St. Mary Mead, stirring up trouble. He's heard about that gambling parlor in Dannemouth, too. Thinks it's one of Lang's operations. And then there's young Tom Carter. Arthur knows his father. You see, Tom's been spending every penny he's got at that place, and now he's in debt. Elsie came to see me yesterday, practically in tears. She says Tom's changed, secretive, frightened. She thinks Lang's men are threatening him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And what does Mr. Lang say about himself? Has he made any public statements?" "Oh, he's all charm," Dolly said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Calls himself an entrepreneur, says he's here to invest in the community. He's even offered to pay for the church roof, as if that'll make everyone forget the rumors. But Jane, I've seen men like him before. He's got that look too polished, too perfect, like a snake in a suit." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "A snake in a suit," she repeated softly. "An apt description. Dolly, tell me, has anyone in the village had direct dealings with him?" Dolly hesitated. "Well, there's Mr. Pye, the estate agent. He handled the lease of the manor for Lang. Said he was a model client, paid up front, no questions asked. But Pye's a bit of a fool, if you ask me. He didn't think twice about where the money came from. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with Mr. Pye. Estate agents, she knew, often saw more than they realized, details about a client's habits, their visitors, their preferences. She leaned forward slightly. And what about this gambling parlor in Danamouth? Not officially, Dolly admitted. But Craddock says it's got Lang's fingerprints all over it. The place is called the Silver Ace, tucked away in a back street. Very exclusive, very secretive. You need an invitation to get in, and Tom Carter somehow got one. Now he's in over his head. Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, a habit she indulged when her mind was at work. I see, she said. And Elsie, how is she holding up? She's terrified, Dolly said. She came to me because she didn't know who else to turn to. She thinks Tom's mixed up with something dangerous, and she's afraid he'll do something desperate. I told her to stay calm, but, oh, Jane, I wish you'd talk to her. You've got a way of putting people at ease. Miss Marple smiled. Faintly, I'll speak with Elsie, she said. And perhaps I'll take a closer look at this Mr. Lang. He sounds like a man who enjoys attention. That can be a weakness, you know. Dolly looked at her friend, a spark of hope in her eyes. You've got that look, Jane, the one you get when you're onto something. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Miss Marple's smile widened, though her eyes remained sharp. I'm thinking, Dolly, that St. Mary Mead is a small place, and small places have a way of revealing secrets. Mr. Lang may think he's untouchable, but no one is invisible, not to the right pair of eyes. The two women spent the rest of the morning discussing the village's recent events, but Miss Marple's mind was already weaving a plan. She would start with Elsie, whose fear might hold the key to understanding Lang's operations. Then there was Mr. Pye, whose chatter might reveal more than he intended. And, of course, there was the manor itself, place Miss Marple intended to observe closely. As she left Gossington Hall, the sun was high in the sky, and the village seemed as peaceful as ever. But Miss Marple knew better. She had seen the black car, heard the whispers, read Dolly's letter. A shadow had fallen over St. Mary Mead, and its name was Victor Lang. She walked home slowly, her mind a whirl of possibilities, her heart steady with the quiet resolve that had unraveled so many mysteries before. That afternoon, Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, penning a note to her nephew, Raymond West. Raymond, a writer with a flair for the dramatic, had connections in London that might prove useful. She asked him to make discreet inquiries about Victor Langnoth. Too obvious, just enough to confirm the rumors. She sealed the letter and handed it to Mr. Dobbs when he passed by on his evening round. As evening fell, Miss Marple took her knitting to the window once more, her eyes scanning the high street. The black car appeared again, its engine purring softly as it slowed near the manor's gates. A figure stepped out, a tall man in a well-cut suit, his hair dark and slicked back, his movements confident. Victor Lang, she presumed. He paused, glancing around as if to ensure he was unobserved, then disappeared into the manor. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, but her mind was racing. She thought of the gambling parlor, the ledger that must exist somewhere, the secrets hidden behind Lang's polished facade. She thought of Elsie's fear, Tom's desperation, and the village's quiet trust in her ability to see what others missed. A plan was forming, vague but promising, like the first threads of a tapestry. It would require patience, observation, and perhaps a touch of daring. But Miss Marple was no stranger to daring not when justice was at stake. She set her knitting aside and rose to make another cup of tea. The night was still, the village asleep, but Miss Marple's work had only just begun. Victor Lang might think himself the master of St. Mary Mead, but he had yet to meet its most unassuming resident. And Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, was not a woman to be underestimated. Chapter 2. The Gambler's Charm. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow across the village green, where the annual fete was in full swing. Bunting fluttered in the gentle breeze, strung between ancient oaks, and the air was alive with the hum of laughter, the clink of teacups, and the occasional triumphant shout from the coconut shy. Stalls lined the perimeter, laden with homemade jams, knitted scarves, and trays of Victoria's sponge, their scents mingling with the crisp tang of autumn leaves. Children darted through the crowd, clutching toffee apples, while their parents exchanged pleasantries over glasses of lemonade. It was the kind of scene that Miss Jane Marple, seated on a wicker chair near the tea tent, cherished for its deceptive simplicity, a tableau of village life that often concealed deeper currents. Miss Marple's sharp eyes, half hidden behind her spectacles, scanned the gathering with quiet interest. She wore her usual attire, a sensible tweed skirt, a pale blue cardigan, and a neat hat adorned with a single feather. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster enjoying the festivities, but her mind was far from idle. She had overheard snippets of conversation at Mrs. Price's tea shop earlier that week, whispers about a newcomer named Victor Lang, a man whose charm seemed to outshine even the sunniest of St. Mary Mead's days. The gossip had piqued her curiosity, and when Dolly Bantry's letter arrived, hinting at trouble tied to Lang's name, Miss Marple knew the fete would be the perfect place to observe him. The crowd parted slightly, and there he was, Victor Lang, striding across the green with the confidence of a man who knew all eyes were on him. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back, and a smile that gleamed like polished silver. His tailored suit, a touch too fine for a village fete, marked him as an outsider, yet he moved with an ease that disarmed suspicion. He paused at the tambola stall, tossing a coin to the attendant with a flourish, and drawing a cheer as he pulled a winning ticket for the church roof fund. He declared, handing the prize a basket of preserves to a delighted vicar. The crowd murmured approval, and Miss Marple noted how effortlessly he won their favor. "He's quite the showman, isn't he?" remarked Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, who had settled beside Miss Marple with a cup of tea. Her tone was warm, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "A generous man, it seems, though generosity often has its reasons." She smiled faintly, her needles never pausing. Mrs. Clement nodded, complimenting the flower arrangements, and even joining a tug-of-war match, much to the delight of the younger villagers. His laughter rang out, rich and infectious. Narrowed eyes, his arms crossed tightly. Mrs. Lucy, who ran the post office. Miss Marple filed these observations away, her mind already weaving patterns from the threads of human behavior. It was near the cake stall, under the shade of a sycamore, that Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a young woman hovering at the edge of the crowd. She was slight, with mousy brown hair pulled into a hasty bun, and her hands twisted nervously in the folds of her cotton dress. Elsie Carter, Miss Marple recalled, the baker's daughter, known for her quiet demeanor and deft hand with pastry. Today, though, Elsie's eyes were red-rimmed, and her gaze darted toward Lang with a mixture of fear and fascination. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who knew exactly where she needed to be. "Elsie, my dear," she said, approaching the young woman with a kind smile, "you look troubled. Is there anything an old woman like me can do to help?" Elsie started, her cheeks flushing. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's nothing, really, just the fate's a bit overwhelming, that's all." Her voice was unsteady, and she glanced at Lang again, who was now tossing a ball at the skittle alley. Miss Marple followed her gaze. "Mr. Lang certainly knows how to draw a crowd," she said lightly. "Quite the generous benefactor, I hear, though I imagine not everyone benefits equally from such charm." Elsie's lips trembled, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt. But then the young woman's shoulders sagged, and she whispered, "It's my brother, Tom. He's in trouble, Miss Marple. Bad trouble. And it's all because of him." They found a quiet bench near the edge of the green, away from the bustle of the fete. Elsie hesitated, then poured out her story in a rush. Tom, her older brother, had always been a dreamer, prone to grand schemes and reckless bets. A pub just outside St. Mary Mead were run by Lang's associates, Elsie said, and Tom had been lured by promises of easy money. But then the losses began to mount, and soon he owed more than he could ever repay. Lang's men had visited the bakery late one night. Tom was now desperate, skipping work and avoiding home, terrified of what might happen next. "He won't tell me everything," Elsie said, her voice breaking. "But I heard him mention a ledger, something about names and debts. He said if he could get it, he might be free, but it's too dangerous. Oh, Miss Marple, I'm so afraid for him." Miss Marple patted Elsie's hand, her mind racing. A ledger of debts tied to Victor Lang's operations suggested a far-reaching network, one that thrived on fear and obligation. She thought of similar cases from her past, men like Lang, who used charm as a mask for control, ensnaring the vulnerable in their webs. She recalled a young man in her youth, a farmer's son, who had fallen prey to a loan shark in Much Benham. The parallels were striking, and Miss Marple knew that such men rarely worked alone. There, Elsie," she said gently, "you've done right to tell me. We'll find a way to help Tom, but we must be careful. Men like Mr. Lang are clever, and they don't take kindly to interference." Elsie nodded, wiping her eyes. "You won't tell anyone, will you? If they find out, I've spoken." "Not a soul," Miss Marple promised, her tone firm but kind. "Now, go back to your stall and try to carry on as usual. I'll think on this, and we'll speak again soon." As Elsie returned to the cake stall, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her knitting needles clicking once more. Her eyes followed Lang, who was now posing for a photograph with the vicar and the head of the Women's Institute. His smile was flawless, but Miss Marple saw the calculation behind it. She thought of Elsie's words about the ledger and Tom's desperation. If Lang was indeed running an illegal gambling ring, as the village gossip suggested, then his influence extended beyond St. Mary Mead. The question was how deep it ran and how many lives it had already ruined. The fate continued into the late afternoon, with Lang at its center, distributing prizes and making grand gestures. He donated a hefty sum to the village hall restoration, earning a round of applause and even offered to sponsor a children's cricket match the following month. Each act was met with admiration, but Miss Marple noted the subtle signs of unease. Among those who knew more than they let on, the postmistress, Mrs. Lucy, avoided Lang's gaze entirely, and Mr. Harris, the butcher, muttered something to his wife that made her frown. Miss Marple's mind turned over the pieces, fitting them together like a jigsaw puzzle as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the green. Miss Marple made her way to the tea tent for a final cup. There she found herself beside Mrs. Bantry, who had arrived late from Gossington Hall. Dolly Bantry was a stout, cheerful woman with a penchant for gossip and a sharp mind that Miss Marple greatly valued. Her letter had been the first to mention Victor Lang, hinting at connections to darker dealings in London. "Jane, you sly thing," Dolly said, settling beside her with a plate of scones. "You've been watching that Lang fellow like a hawk. What's he done to earn your attention?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, Dolly, you know I'm just an old woman who likes to observe. But I will say Mr. Lang is interesting. He has a way of making friends, doesn't he?" "Too many, if you ask me," Dolly replied, lowering her voice. "He says Lang's name has come up in connection with some nasty business, gambling, blackmail, that sort of thing. Nothing proven, of course. Money, I'd wager," Dolly said with a snort. "Or power. Men like that don't come to places like this for the scenery." "Quite," Miss Marple agreed, "and I fear he's already caused harm. Have you heard anything about young Tom Carter?" Dolly's eyes widened. "The baker's boy. Is he mixed up with Lang?" "I'm afraid so," Miss Marple said, her voice low. She recounted Elsie's story, omitting no detail, and what unraveled his schemes. Victor Lang was dangerous, but he was not invincible. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile as she entered her cottage, the seeds of a plan already taking root. The next morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with talk of the fate and Victor Lang's generosity. Miss Marple sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming beside her, and opened her notebook. She jotted down names: Tom, Elsie, Langend, drew lines connecting them to the Blue Boar, the Ledger, and Dolly's inspector friend. She added a question mark beside London, knowing that Lang's past held the key to his present. Then she closed the notebook and picked up her knitting, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. Over the next few days, Miss Marple made discreet inquiries. She visited the bakery, ostensibly to buy a loaf of Elsie's rye bread, and gently probed for more details about Tom. Elsie, still shaken, revealed that Tom had been seen near the manor house Lang had rented on the outskirts of the village. The manor, a grand but faded estate called Netherfield Grange, had been empty for years until Lang's arrival. Miss Marple noted this, recalling how such places often served as hubs for unsavory activities. She also spoke with Mrs. Lucy at the post office, who admitted, after some coaxing, that strange parcels had been arriving for Lang, marked with unfamiliar names and addresses. "Always paid for in cash," Mrs. Lucy said, her lips pursed. "And those men who collect them rough types, not from around here." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on, her steps taking her past the Blue Boar. The pub was quiet in the morning light, but she lingered near the entrance, noting the new lock on the side door and the faint sound of voices from within. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were not discussing the weather. By the time she returned home, Her notebook held a few more lines, each one a thread in the web she was weaving. That evening, Miss Marple invited Elsie to her cottage for tea. The young woman arrived, her eyes wary but hopeful. Over scones and Darjeeling, Miss Marple outlined the beginnings of a plan, not the full shape of it, for she knew Elsie's nerves could not bear it, but enough to give her purpose. "Elsie, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice steady, "I believe we can help Tom, but it will require courage. Mr. Lang trusts his charm, and that is his weakness. If you're willing, I think you could gain his confidence, perhaps even learn more about this ledger." Elsie's eyes widened. "Me? But how? He'd never trust me." "Oh, I think he might," Miss Marple said, with a smile. "Men like Mr. Lang see what they want to see. If you show an interest in his world, just enough to flatter his ego, he may let you closer than he should." Elsie hesitated, then nodded. "For Tom, I'll try, but what if he suspects me?" "You'll have help," Miss Marple assured her. "And I'll be watching, as I always do." As Elsie left, the night air cool and sharp, Miss Marple stood at her window, gazing out at the quiet village. Victor Lang's shadow loomed large, but she had faced shadows before. She thought of the Tuesday night club, her old allies who had helped unravel mysteries in the past. Perhaps it was time to call on them again. With a final glance at the stars, she turned back to her knitting, her mind already spinning the next thread in her daring plan to snare a vicious racketeer. Chapter 3. Whispers of a dark past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak floor. She sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea cooling on the small table. Beside her, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue shawl. The rhythm of the needles was soothing, but her mind was far from idle. The arrival of Victor Lang in St. Mary Mead had stirred something in her, a quiet, persistent unease that refused to be dismissed. The village, with its tidy gardens and familiar faces, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of secrets, and Miss Marple knew better than to ignore such whispers. She set her knitting aside and reached for the letter that had arrived yesterday from her old friend, Dolly Bantry. The envelope, slightly creased from its journey, bore Dolly's distinctive, looping handwriting. Miss Marple opened it again, though she had already read it twice. The words were light and chatty, as was Dolly's way, but beneath the pleasantries lay a thread of concern that had caught Miss Marple's attention. "My dear Jane," the letter began, "you must come to Gossington Hall at once. Arthur is off on one of his fishing trips, and I'm rattling around this big house with only my thoughts for company. But it's not just that, there's something odd going on in the village. You'll have heard of this Victor Lang, I'm sure. Such a charming man, or so everyone says, but I've heard whispers, Jane, whispers of things not quite right. You know how I hate to pry. Well, perhaps I don't hate it as much as I should, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to him than meets the eye. Do come, Jane. Your sharp eyes and sharper mind are just what I need." Miss Marple smiled faintly at Dolly's characteristic blend of warmth and curiosity. Dolly Bantry was no fool, despite her tendency to play the scatterbrained hostess. If she sensed trouble, there was likely something to it, and the mention of Victor Lang, whose name had already surfaced in the tea shop gossip, confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions that his arrival was no mere coincidence. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her handbag. A visit to Gossington Hall was in order. The walk to Gossington Hall was pleasant, the late summer air warm but not oppressive, with a breeze carrying the scent of roses from the village gardens. St. Mary Mead was at its loveliest this time of year, with hollyhocks nodding over stone walls and children playing in the lanes. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of what she'd heard about Victor Lang. The tea shop had been abuzz yesterday with talk of his charm, his wealth, his generous donations to the church roof fund. But there had been other whispers, two darker ones. A young man, it was said, had lost his savings to a gambling debt, and Lang's name was mentioned in hushed tones. Miss Marple had noted the speaker's nervous glance, as if afraid of being overheard. Gossington Hall stood at the edge of the village, a sprawling Georgian manor with ivy-clad walls and tall windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Dolly Bantry was waiting at the front door, her face lighting up as she saw Miss Marple approach. "Jane, oh, you're a sight for sore eyes," Dolly exclaimed, ushering her inside. Come in, I've got tea ready, and I've been dying to talk to you." The drawing room was as grand as ever, though Dolly's touch-bright cushions, vases of wildflowers, and a slightly cluttered charm made it feel welcoming. They settled into plush armchairs, and Dolly poured tea from a silver pot, her hands moving with the ease of long practice. "Now, Jane," Dolly said, leaning forward, "tell me what you make of this Victor Lang business. Everyone's talking about him, but I don't trust charm like that. It's too polished, too perfect. Reminds me of that dreadful man who swindled poor Mrs. Hartley out of her savings years ago." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. "There's certainly something about him," she agreed. "I've heard his name mentioned in connection with gambling debts, and yet he seems to have won over half the village with his generosity. It's an interesting contrast." "Exactly," Dolly said, her voice rising. "He's too good to be true. And then there's this friend of Arthur's, Inspector Hargreaves. He's retired now, but he was here last week, and he said something that's been nagging at me. He knew Lang's name from his days in London, said he was mixed up in all sorts of shady business, extortion, blackmail, you name it, but nothing ever stuck. Lang's too clever, Hargreaves said, always one step ahead." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Extortion and blackmail," she murmured. "Those are serious accusations. Did Inspector Hargreaves mention any specifics?" Dolly shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Not much, I'm afraid. Just that Lang had a knack for getting powerful people in his pocket. Politicians, businessmen, even a judge once, or so Hargreaves heard. But there was never enough evidence to pin him down. He's like a ghost, slippery, untouchable." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her mind already turning over possibilities. "A man like that doesn't come to a quiet place like St. Mary Mead without a reason," she said. "He's either hiding from something or setting up something new. Either way, it's worth looking into." Dolly clapped her hands together. "I knew you'd say that. Oh, Jane, you're just the person for this. You've got that way of seeing through people, like you're peering right into their souls. What do you think we should do?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the edge of her teacup. "For now we observe. People reveal themselves in time, Dolly. They always do. Tell me, does Inspector Hargreaves still visit?" "Yes," Dolly said. "He's staying in Chipping Cleghorn for a few weeks, visiting his sister. I could ask him to come by again, if you like. He's always happy to talk about his old cases. That would be most helpful, Miss Marple said. I'd like to hear more about Mr. Lang's past, and perhaps we should keep an eye on his movements in the village. He's bound to slip up sooner or later. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her mind buzzing with thoughts of Victor Lang. The man was an enigma, but not an unfamiliar one. She had known men like him before, charming, cunning, always with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. There was a case from her youth, a distant memory of a dashing young man who had swept into a neighboring village, winning hearts and wallets alike before vanishing with a small fortune. The parallels were striking, and Miss Marple felt a familiar spark of determination. If Victor Lang was up to no good, she would find out. She spent the evening sorting through her memories, piecing together what she knew of Lang and what she suspected. The gambling debts were troubling, but they were only the surface. Extortion and blackmail, as Dolly's inspector friend had suggested, pointed to a far more dangerous game. Lang's influence, it seemed, extended beyond St. Mary Mead, perhaps even to London. But why come here? A quiet village was an unlikely place for a man of his ambitions, unless he saw it as a perfect hiding spot or a new hunting ground. The next morning, Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to the village post office, a hub of gossip and information. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, was a sharp-eyed woman with a knack for remembering every detail of the village's comings and goings. As Miss Marple stepped into the small, cluttered shop, the bell above the door jingled cheerfully. "Good morning, Mrs. Weatherby," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I was wondering if you'd had any interesting visitors lately. New faces, perhaps." Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed with the promise of a good chat. "Oh, Miss Marple, you've come at the right time. There's been all sorts of talk about that Mr. Lang. Ever so charming, he is, but I don't know. There's something about him. He was in here just yesterday, posting a parcel to London. A big one, mind you, and he was particular about it being sent express." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "A parcel to London, you say? Did he mention what it was?" "Not a word," Mrs. Weatherby said, leaning closer. "But he was in a hurry, and he kept looking over his shoulder, like he thought someone was watching him. And then there's that young man who's been hanging about, Tom Carter, Elsie's brother. I heard he's in some sort of trouble, and Lang's name came up." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her mind racing. Tom Carter's name had surfaced in the tea-shop gossip too, tied to those gambling debts. And now a mysterious parcel to London. It was a small piece of the puzzle, but every piece mattered. "Thank you, Mrs. Weatherby," she said. "You've been most helpful. If you hear anything more about Mr. Lang, do let me know." "Oh, I will, Miss Marple," Mrs. Weatherby said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You can count on me." Over the next few days, Miss Marple made discreet inquiries around the village, piecing together a picture of Victor Lang's activities. He was everywhere, it seemed, chatting with the vicar, donating to the school's library fund, even offering to sponsor the upcoming village fete. His charm was undeniable, but Miss Marple noticed the way certain people avoided his gaze, the way conversations hushed when he entered a room. There was fear beneath the admiration. 7. Her black handbag clutched in one hand, her mind sharp with anticipation. The inspector was a stout man with a weathered face and keen eyes that missed little. He greeted Miss Marple warmly. Clearly pleased to meet someone Dolly spoke of so highly. Mrs. Bantry tells me you're interested in Victor Lang, Hargreaves said, settling into an armchair with a glass of whiskey. I'm not surprised. He's a slippery one, that man. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. What sort of things was he? Involved in, Inspector? All sorts, Miss Marple. Gambling rackets, mostly, but there were rumors of worse blackmail, extortion, even a few disappearances that were never quite explained. Lang had a way of getting what he wanted. He'd find a man's weakness, debts, secrets, ambition, use it like a lever. And he was clever about it. Always had others do his dirty work, so his hands stayed clean. Miss Marple's eyes were bright with interest. And yet he's here, in St. Mary Mead. Why, do you think? Hargreaves shrugged. Could be he's lying low. London's a hotbed for men like him, too many eyes, too many enemies. A place like this, quiet and out of the way, might suit him for a while. But I'd wager he's not here for the scenery. He's planning something, mark my words. But what can we do about it? If the police couldn't catch him in London, what chance do we have here? Miss Marple's smile was serene, but there was a glint in her eyes. Oh, I think we have a very good chance, Dolly. Men like Mr. Lang thrive on secrecy, but they also have weaknesses. Arrogance, for one, and a tendency to underestimate those they consider beneath them. We'll watch him, and we'll wait. He'll make a mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready. Hargreaves raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Got a sharp mind, Miss Marple. I'd have liked to have you on my team back in the day. Thank you, Inspector, Miss Marple said. I may well take you up on that. As the days passed, Miss Marple's quiet observation of Victor Lang continued. She noted his comings and goings, the way he lingered at the village pub, the way his car, sleek, expensive model, disappeared down the lane to the manor he'd rented on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead. The manor, a grand old house called Briarwood, had been empty for years, and Lang's decision to take it up had raised eyebrows. Miss Marple had walked past it one evening, her pace slow and deliberate, and had seen lights burning late into the night, shadows moving behind the curtains. There was something happening there, something hidden, and she was determined to uncover it. One afternoon, as she sat in the tea shop, she overheard a conversation that confirmed her suspicions. Two women, their heads bent close together, were whispering about a young Manton Carter, Elsie's brother, who had been seen arguing with one of Lang's associates outside the pub. The argument had turned heated, and Tom had stormed off, his face pale with anger or fear. Miss Marple filed the information away, her thoughts turning to Elsie. The girl was young, impressionable, and fiercely loyal to her brother. If Tom was in trouble, Elsie might be the key to reaching Haymond, to reaching Lang that evening. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap, her mind weaving a plan as intricate as the shawl she was working on. Victor Lang was a dangerous man, but danger was no match for patience and perception. She thought of the village, with its quiet strength and hidden depths, and of the people who trusted her to see what others missed. She thought of Elsie, of Tom, of the shadows that had fallen over St. Mary Mead, and she knew, with a quiet certainty, that she would find a way to bring those shadows into the light the next morning. Tricky mystery. Raymond West, her nephew, would be there, along with Sir Henry Clithering, a former Scotland Yard commissioner with a sharp mind and a fondness for Miss Marple's methods. Together, They would begin to lay the groundwork for Victor Lang. Undoing as she sealed the note, Miss Marple glanced out her window at the peaceful village beyond. The sun was rising, painting the rooftops gold, and for a moment all seemed right with the world. But she knew better. Beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, and she was ready to face it. The meeting of the Tuesday night club took place 2 evenings later. In the cozy library of Gossington Hall, Dolly had outdone herself, setting out a spread of scones, sandwiches, and a pot of strong tea. Raymond West, looking as literary and slightly disheveled as ever, lounged in an armchair, while Sir Henry Clithering sat upright, his eyes alert. Miss Marple took her place by the fire, her knitting in her lap, her expression serene but focused. "So, Aunt Jane," Raymond said, a teasing note in his voice, "what's this about a criminal mastermind in St. Mary Mead? I thought this place was all about tea parties and church bazaars." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, Raymond, you'd be surprised what goes on beneath the surface of a tea party. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Dolly, perhaps you could start by telling Sir Henry what you told me about Victor Lang." Dolly recounted her conversation with Inspector Hargreaves, her voice growing more animated as she described Lang's rumored crimes. Sir Henry listened intently, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Sounds like a nasty piece of work," he said when Dolly finished. "I've heard of Lang myself, though I never crossed paths with him. He's clever, I'll give him that." Miss Marple nodded. "I've been watching him, and I've noticed things, small things, but they add up. The late-night visitors at Briarwood, the parcel to London, the way certain people avoid him." "You've been busy, Aunt Jane. What's your theory?" "I don't have a theory yet," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "But I do have a memory. Years ago, in a village not unlike this one, there was a man who charmed everyone, generous, handsome, the life of every gathering. But he was running a racket, using people's secrets against them. He made one mistake. He underestimated the people he thought were insignificant. I believe Mr. Lang may be making the same mistake." "Oh." Sir Henry leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And what do you propose we do, Miss Marple?" "For now, we watch," she said. "We listen. We gather information. I'd like to know more about Tom Carter and his sister, Elsie. They may be the key to understanding Lang's operations here. And I'd like to hear more from Inspector Hargreaves, if possible. His knowledge of Lang's past could be invaluable." Dolly clapped her hands together. "Oh, Jane, it's like something out of one of Raymond's novels. A proper mystery, right here in St. Mary Mead." Raymond grinned. "Don't tempt me, Dolly. I might just write it up. But Aunt Jane's right. We need to be careful. If Lang's as dangerous as you say, we can't afford to tip him off." Sir Henry nodded. "I'll reach out to some old contacts at the Yard, see what I can dig up. Discreetly, of course. And I'll talk to Hargreaves. In the meantime, Miss Marple, I've a feeling you'll see something the rest of us miss." Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles clicking softly. The days that followed were a blur of quiet observation and careful planning. Miss Marple spent her mornings in the village, chatting with shopkeepers, visiting the church, and dropping in on neighbors. To anyone watching, she was simply an L. Elsie glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard. To Mr. Lang's people, "Tom wouldn't tell me much, but he said they're dangerous. He tried to get out, but they wouldn't let him, and now I'm so scared for him." Miss Marple patted Elsie's hand. "You were right to tell me, Elsie. I know this is frightening, but you're not alone. We'll find Tom, and we'll make sure he's safe. But I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Elsie nodded, her eyes wide. "What do you want me to do?" "For now, just keep your eyes and ears open," Miss Marple said. "If you hear anything about Mr. Lang or his associates, let me know. And don't confront them yourself. It's too dangerous. Will you promise me that?" Elsie nodded again, a spark of determination in her eyes. "I promise, Miss Marple." That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting forgotten as she turned over the pieces of the puzzle. Tom Carter's disappearance, Lang's late-night visitors, the parcel to whodunit, all pointed to a larger operation, one that extended far beyond St. Mary Mead. But Lang's weakness, she suspected, was his need for control. He thrived on power, on knowing he could manipulate those around him. That was where she would start. She thought back to the man from her youth, the one who had underestimated his victims. He had been brought down by a simple, carefully planted rumor that had led him to reveal his own guilt. Miss Marple wondered if a similar approach might work with Lang. He was clever, but he was also vain, and vanity was a weakness she could exploit. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple began to form a plan. It would require patience, cunning, and the help of her friends. But she had no doubt it could be done. Victor Lang might think himself untouchable, but he had come to the wrong village and he had underestimated the wrong woman. Chapter 4. The Tuesday night club reconvenes. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, painting the cobblestone paths and thatched roofs with a warm, deceptive calm. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window of her modest cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale pink shawl. To an outsider, she might have appeared as just another elderly spinster, lost in the quiet routine of village life. But her sharp eyes, darting occasionally to the garden path outside, betrayed a mind at work, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had begun to take shape in the wake of Victor Lang's arrival. The village had been abuzz since the fete, where Lang's charm had dazzled the locals. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Elsie's whispered confession about her brother Tom's gambling debts, and the troubling hints from Dolly Bantry about Lang's darker connections. The pieces were scattered, but Miss Marple had a knack for arranging such fragments into a coherent picture. She knew, however, that this particular puzzle required more than her solitary musings. Victor Lang was no petty village troublemaker. He was a man of cunning, cloaked in charisma, and untouchable by ordinary means. To unravel his schemes, she would need allies, trusted minds who could match her own in observation and deduction. As the clock on the mantel struck 4, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, smoothing her skirt with a purposeful air. She had sent out discreet invitations that morning, each written in her neat, looping hand, to a select group of confidants. The Tuesday night club, as she fondly recalled their informal gatherings from years past, was about to reconvene. It was not a club in any formal sense, just a circle of friends and acquaintances who shared a taste for unraveling mysteries. Tonight, they would meet, not to reminisce over old cases, but to confront a present danger lurking in their quiet village. The drawing room of Miss Marple's cottage was small but cozy, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and shelves of well-worn books. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room as her guests began to arrive. First came her nephew, Raymond West, a writer whose sharp intellect was often tempered by a touch of youthful arrogance. He strode in with his usual energy, his dark hair slightly tousled, and kissed his aunt on the cheek. "Aunt Jane, you've got that look in your eye," he said, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "What's this all about?" Your note was delightfully cryptic. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Patience, Raymond. All will be clear soon enough." Next came Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard commissioner, whose imposing frame seemed at odds with his gentle demeanor. He had been a frequent visitor to St. Mary Mead since his retirement, drawn by the village's charm and Miss Marple's uncanny insight. His gray eyes twinkled as he greeted her. "Jane, I suspect you've sniffed out trouble again," he said, taking a seat near the fire. "Your invitations always come with a whiff of intrigue." The final guest was Dr. Haydock, the village physician, whose gruff exterior hid a keen mind and a deep loyalty to St. Mary Mead. He arrived last, muttering about a patient who refused to follow his advice, and settled heavily into an armchair with a glass of sherry Miss Marple had poured with her guests assembled. Miss Marple took her place by the fire, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The room fell quiet, the only sounds the crackle of the flames and the distant chirping of evening birds. She surveyed her companions, each chosen for their unique perspective. Raymond for his creativity, Sir Henry for his experience with criminals, and Dr. Haydock for his knowledge of the village's pulse. "My friends," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I've asked you here because St. Mary Mead faces a threat that is not immediately apparent. You've all heard of Victor Lang, the newcomer who has so charmed the village. But I believe he is not what he seems." Raymond leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Lang, the fellow who donated all that money at the fete. He seemed decent enough, bit of a show-off, perhaps." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her eyes narrowing. "It is the show that concerns me. Men like Victor Lang do not act without purpose. His generosity, his charm, it's all a performance, and I fear the audience is being played." Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. "You suspect he's up to something criminal, Jane?" "I do," she replied, "and not just any crime. I believe he is running an illegal gambling ring, one that has already ensnared at least one young man in our village. Elsie Carter, whom some of you may know, confided in me at the fete. Her brother Tom has fallen into ruinous debt, owing money to Lang's associates, and there are whispers, nothing concrete, mind you, of darker deeds tied to Lang's name." Dr. Haydock frowned, swirling his sherry. "Tom Carter. Decent lad, but impulsive. I treated him for a bruised jaw last month, said he'd fallen, but I suspected a fight. You think Lang's men roughed him up?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, "but I fear Tom's troubles are only a symptom of a larger disease. Dolly Bantry wrote to me recently, hinting at Lang's connections to serious crimes in London, extortion, blackmail, perhaps worse. Her friend, a retired inspector, spoke of Lang as a man who operates just beyond the reach of the law." Sir Henry leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Victor Lang. The name does ring a bell. There were rumors in London a few years back, nothing proven, of course. He's clever, always one step ahead of the evidence. If he's set up shop in St. Mary Mead, he's likely using the village as a quiet base for something bigger." "Exactly," Miss Marple said, "and that is why we must act. Lang is no ordinary crook. He thrives on manipulation, on exploiting trust. To catch him, we must think as he does, anticipate his moves, and turn his own tactics against him." Raymond grinned, his writer's imagination already spinning. "Sounds like a story I'd write, Aunt Jane. So, what's the plan? Are we forming a secret society to take down a criminal mastermind?" Miss Marple's lips twitched in amusement. "Nothing so dramatic, Raymond. But I do believe we can outwit Mr. Lang by using the very thing he underestimates, the quiet observation of ordinary people. I've seen his type before, you see. Many years ago, in St. Mary Mead, there was a man named Mr. Hargreaves, charming, generous, always the center of attention. He ran a scheme, selling fraudulent investments, preying on the hopes of widows and shopkeepers. He was caught, eventually, because he could not resist boasting about his cleverness." Sir Henry nodded. "I remember a case like that in my early days at the Yard. A swindler named Carver, smooth as silk, but he loved the sound of his own voice. We caught him when he bragged to the wrong person. You think Lang's cut from the same cloth?" "I do," Miss Marple said. "He's careful, but his ego is his weakness. He wants to be seen as untouchable, admired. That's why he plays the benefactor at village events. But such men always overreach. We must give him the opportunity to do so on our terms." Dr. Haydock set his glass down with a clink. "All well and good, Miss Marple, but how do we get close to him? He's not likely to confess his sins to a group of villagers, no matter how clever we are." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "We don't need him to confess, not yet. We need information. Elsie Carter is our way in. She's desperate to save her brother, and Lang has already taken an interest in her. If we can guide her discreetly, she might gain his trust and learn more about his operations." Raymond frowned. "That sounds risky, Aunt Jane, putting a young girl in the path of a man like Lang. What if he suspects her?" "It is a risk," Miss Marple admitted. "But Elsie is no fool, and she's driven by love for her brother. With our guidance, she can play her part safely. I've already spoken to her, and she's willing. Our task is to ensure she's protected, and to use what she learns to build a case." Sir Henry rubbed his chin, considering. "If Lang's running a gambling ring, there'll be records, ledgers, names, amounts. Men like him keep meticulous accounts to maintain control. If Elsie could find those, or even hint at where they're kept, Scotland Yard could take it from there." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, "but we must be patient. Lang is cautious, and any move against him must be subtle. I propose we start by observing his habits, where he goes, who he meets, the manor he's rented. Mead House is a good place to begin. I've noticed lights burning late there, and strangers coming and going at odd hours." Dr. Haydock grunted. "Mead's a bit out of the way, perfect spot for shady business. I could take a walk that way. Say I'm checking on a patient nearby. Might see something useful." Raymond leaned forward, eager. "And I could nose around the village, chat up the locals. People talk to writers, they think I'm harmless. Maybe I'll pick up some gossip about Lang's visitors." Miss Marple nodded approvingly. "Good. And Sir Henry, if you could reach out to your old contacts at Scotland Yard, discreetly, we might learn more about Lang's past. Nothing official, yet just whispers, rumors. The more we know, the better. We can predict his moves." Sir Henry smiled. "I've a few old colleagues who owe me a favor. I'll see what I can dig up without raising alarms." The fire had burned low, and the room was filled with the soft glow of lamplight. Miss Marple looked at each of her companions, her expression resolute. "We are not detectives nor vigilantes. We are simply people who care about St. Mary Mead and its people. But together we can do what the law alone cannot. Victor Lang believes he's untouchable. Let us prove him wrong." The group sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their task settling over them. It was Raymond who broke the quiet, his voice light but determined. "The Tuesday night club rides again, eh? I'll say this, Aunt Jane, you never pick a dull case." Miss Marple's smile was faint but warm. "Life in St. Mary Mead is rarely as dull as it seems, Raymond. Now, let us be careful and clever. Mr. Lang will not make this easy." As her guests departed into the cool evening, Miss Marple returned to her armchair, picking up her knitting once more. Her needles resumed their steady rhythm, but her mind was far from the pink shawl in her hands. She thought of Elsie, brave but vulnerable, of Tom, lost to his debts, and of Victor Lang, a man whose charm masked a ruthless ambition. She recalled Mr. Hargreaves again, and how his downfall had come not from a grand confrontation, but from a single, careless moment, a boast overheard by the right ears. "People are so very predictable," she murmured to herself, her eyes glinting in the firelight, "and that Mr. Lang will be your undoing." The night deepened over St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple's cottage stood quiet, a beacon of unassuming resolve in a village that was, for now, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering. On its horizon, the days that followed were a study in quiet vigilance. Miss Marple went about her routine, tending her garden, chatting with neighbors at the tea shop, attending church, but her eyes and ears were always open. She noted the comings and goings at Dane Mead House, visible from the edge of her garden. On clear days, the manor, a grand old pile, half hidden by overgrown hedges, had always been a place of mystery, its owners rarely staying long. Delivery vans arrived at odd hours, their drivers avoiding eye contact with passers-by. Men in sharp suits, their accents not quite local, were seen lingering near the gates. Miss Marple made mental notes of each detail, filing them away like the stitches in her knitting. Raymond, true to his word, became a fixture at the village pub, the Blue Boar, where he spun tales of his writing to loosen tongues. The locals, fond of their resident author, were eager to share gossip. "That Langfellow's got a fancy motor car," the barman told Raymond one evening, polishing a glass. "Seen it tearing down the lane to Danemead at all hours. And those men with hymn city types, not our sort." Raymond nodded, committing the details to memory, and bought the barman a pint to keep the conversation flowing. Dr. Haydock, meanwhile, took his promised walks past Danemead House, his doctor's bag swinging at his side as a convenient excuse. "Lang's not taking chances," Haydock said over tea in Miss Marple's kitchen. Sir Henry's inquiries bore fruit as well. A letter arrived from an old colleague at Scotland Yard, written in the careful, coded language of someone who knew the value of discretion. It confirmed what Dolly Bantry had hinted. Victor Lang was a known name in London's underworld, suspected of running a network of illegal betting houses and extorting payments from desperate debtors. "No hard evidence," the letter read, "but he's slippery as an eel. Always has a fall guy or a clean alibi." Sir Henry shared the letter with Miss Marple, his expression grim. "If we're to catch him, Jane, We'll need something solid, documents, witnesses, something he can't wriggle out of. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over possibilities. Elsie will be our key, she said, but we must prepare her carefully. Lang is no fool, he'll be watching for betrayal. We need to give Elsie a story that makes her valuable to him, but not so valuable that he grows suspicious. The plan began to take shape over several meetings at Miss Marple's cottage, each conducted under the guise of a social gathering to avoid arousing suspicion. Elsie was brought into the fold, her pale face set with determination as she listened to Miss Marple's instructions. You must seem eager to please him, Miss Marple told her, but not too eager. Let him think you're naive, a girl in over her head, desperate to save her brother. He'll want to use that desperation. It's how men like him operate. Elsie nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I can do it, Miss Marple. For Tom's sake, I'll do whatever it takes. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Elsie's arm. You're braver than you know, my dear. But you won't be alone. We'll be watching every step of the way. The group devised a strategy to position Elsie as a potential ally to Lang. She would approach him at the next village in exchange for leniency toward Tom's debts. Miss Marple coached her on what to say, how to carry herself, even how to tilt her head to convey just the right mix of innocence and ambition. Men like Lang see what they want to see, Miss Marple said. Give him a mirror to admire himself in, and he'll let his guard down. Raymond, ever the dramatist, suggested adding a touch of flair to the plan. What if we plant a rumor that Elsie's got connections, maybe a cousin in London who knows the gambling scene? Lang's cautious heed check her story. Better to keep it simple. Elsie's desperation is believable because it's true. We'll let that be her weapon. As the auction approached, the village buzzed with anticipation, unaware of the undercurrents at play. Miss Marple attended the event, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles as she watched Lang work. The crowd, he was in his element, bidding generously on a painting donated by Dolly Bantry, his laughter ringing out as he accepted applause. But Miss Marple noticed the way his gaze lingered on Elsie, who stood nervously at the edge of the room, clutching a tray of teacups. When Elsie approached him, stammering an offer to work for him, Lang's smile was predatory but pleased. Well, now, he said, his voice smooth as velvet, a girl with spirit. We might find a place for you, Miss Carter. Come to Mead. Tomorrow we'll talk. Elsie nodded, her face pale but composed, and Miss Marple felt a surge of pride. The bait was set, and Lang had taken it. Over the next week, Elsie visited. Each evening, she reported back to Miss Marple, her voice low as she described the manor's layout. The coded telegrams arriving daily, the men who spoke in hushed tones about the London job. Miss Marple listened intently, her knitting needles never pausing, as she built a mental map of Lang's operations. One detail stood out. Elsie had overheard Lang mention a safe hidden behind a false panel in his study. He was talking to one of his men, Elsie whispered, her eyes wide. Said something about the ledger and how it's the key to keeping everyone in line. I think it's got names, amounts, everything. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. A ledger, she murmured. That's what we need. Proof of his crimes in his own hand. But we must be careful, Elsie. Don't try to find it yet. Just keep watching, listening. As the days passed, the Tuesday night club worked in quiet concert. Raymond continued his reconnaissance at the pub, picking up tidbits about Lang's visitors, men with London accents, one with a scar across his cheek. Dr. Haydock noted an increase in minor injuries among young men in the village, all reluctant to explain their bruises. Sir Henry's contacts sent another letter, this one mentioning a blackmail scheme tied to Lang, targeting wealthy businessmen who frequented his gambling dens. "He's got dirt on half the city," Sir Henry said, his voice grim. "No wonder he's untouchable." Miss Marple's plan evolved with each new piece of information. She knew Lang's downfall would not come from a single blow, but from a series of small, calculated moves. The ledger was the prize, but getting it would require patience and precision. She began to think of the village's upcoming charity gala, grand event that Lang, with his love for spectacle, would surely attend. It could be the perfect stage for a trap, one that played to his ego and his need to be seen as untouchable. Late one evening, as the group gathered once more in her cottage, Miss Marple outlined her idea. "We'll use the gala to make Lang feel threatened," she said. "A rumor, carefully planted, that a rival is moving in on his territory. He's paranoid, sees reports, confirm it. If we can make him believe his control is slipping, he'll act rashly, and in that moment, we'll catch him." Sir Henry nodded, impressed. "A public misstep in front of witnesses. It's clever, Jane, but we'll need more than a scene to bring him down. The ledger, something, just a..." Chapter 5. A dangerous game. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak floor. She sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as her mind worked far faster than her hands. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its quaint cottages and winding lanes, seemed as peaceful as ever. But Miss Marple knew better. Beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, and its name was Victor Lang. The previous evening's conversation with Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall had confirmed her suspicions. Lang, the charming businessman who had so effortlessly won over the villagers, was no mere entrepreneur. His polished exterior hid a web of deceit, woven with threads of extortion, blackmail, and an illegal gambling ring that had already ensnared several of St. Mary Mead's less fortunate souls. Dolly's friend, Inspector Craddock, had spoken of Lang's untouchable status in London, a man who slipped through the fingers of the law like smoke. But Miss Marple had seen such men before, men who believed their cunning made them invincible. She had unraveled their schemes in the past, and she would do so again. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Elsie, the young woman who had confided in her at the village fete about her brother Tom's ruinous gambling debts. Elsie's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless worry. She clutched a handkerchief, twisting it nervously as she stepped inside. "Miss Marple," Elsie said, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I don't know where else to turn. Tom's gone. He didn't come home last night, and I heard from one of the lads at the pub that he went to see some of Mr. Lang's men about. I'm afraid something terrible's happened." Miss Marple set her knitting aside and gestured for Elsie to sit. "Now, my dear, take a deep breath and tell me everything you know. Every detail matters, no matter how small it seems." Elsie recounted what she had heard. Tom, desperate to clear his debts, had gone to the old manor house on the edge of the village. a grand but dilapidated estate recently rented by Victor Lang. The locals whispered that it was more than just a residency, place where shadowy figures came and went under cover of darkness. Tom had been seen arguing with two men outside the manor, men known to work for Lang. No one had seen him since Miss Marple listened intently, her sharp eyes fixed on Elsie's face. She noted the girl's fear, but also her determination. Elsie was no fool. She had come to Miss Marple because she trusted her, and that trust would be the foundation of what came next. "Thank you, Elsie," Miss Marple said gently. "You've done the right thing by coming to me. We'll find Tom, but we must be careful. Men like Victor Lang do not take kindly to interference." Elsie nodded, though her hands still trembled. "What can we do, Miss Marple? The police won't listen to Mead. They say there's no proof Tom's even missing, and Mr. Lang, he's so powerful, everyone's afraid of him." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint, reassuring smile. "Power, my dear, is often an illusion. Men like Lang rely on fear to maintain it, but fear can be undone by those who refuse to be intimidated. Now, I have a plan, but it will require courage. Are you willing to help me?" Elsie hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "If it means saving Tom, I'll do whatever it takes." "Very good," Miss Marple said, "but we must move carefully. First, I need to see this manor house for myself." That afternoon, Miss Marple set out on what the villagers would assume was one of her usual walks. Dressed in her sensible tweed coat and sturdy shoes, a straw hat perched neatly on her head, she carried a small basket as if she were merely collecting wildflowers. To the casual observer, she was nothing more than an elderly spinster enjoying the countryside. But her keen eyes missed nothing as she made her way toward the old manor house. The manor stood at the end of a narrow lane, its once grand facade now weathered and peeling. Ivy clung to the walls, and the windows were shuttered, giving the house an air of secrecy. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the property, ostensibly to adjust her hat, but in reality to study the advertisings. A gravel drive led to the front door, and tire tracks suggested recent visitors. A faint light flickered behind one of the upstairs windows, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. As she lingered, a man emerged from the side of the house, a burly figure with a scar across his cheek, dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper, and glanced around before slipping it into a car parked near the gate. Miss Marple recognized him from the fate. He had been hovering near Victor Lang, his eyes cold and watchful. One of Lang's enforcers, no doubt. She made a mental note of the car's license plate and the direction it took as it sped away. Then, with a purposeful air, she continued her walk, circling the manor at a discreet distance. A narrow path led to the back of the property, where a low stone wall separated the garden from the surrounding woods. There, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs, she spotted a small outbuilding, a gardener's shed, perhaps, but its door was secured with a shiny new padlock that gleamed incongruously against the weathered wood. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A padlock like that was not for keeping tools safe. It was for hiding something. She made her way back to the lane, her mind already piecing together the fragments of what she had seen. The manor was no mere residence. It was a hub of activity, a place where Lang's operations were conducted away from prying eyes. And Tom, poor foolish Tom, had likely stumbled into something dangerous when he confronted Lang's men that evening. Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, a notebook open on her lap. She jotted down her observations, her neat handwriting filling the page with details: the scarred man, the package, the padlock, the tire tracks. She recalled a case from her youth when a similar manor house in a neighboring village had been used as a front for smuggling. The parallels were striking: secretive visitors, coded messages, and a charismatic leader who deflected suspicion with charm. Lang, she suspected, was running more than a gambling ring. Blackmail, perhaps, or even something more sinister. Her thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was her nephew, Raymond West, his face flushed with the energy of youth. "Aunt Jane," he said, stepping inside, "I got your note. What's all this about a missing lad and a shady businessman? Sounds like something out of one of my novels." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Life, Raymond, is often more dramatic than fiction. Sit down, and I'll tell you what I know." She recounted Elsie's story and her own observations at the manor. Raymond listened, his skepticism giving way to intrigue. "Sounds like this Lang chap is a proper villain," he said. "But what can we do? If the police can't touch him, what chance do we have?" "We have the advantage of being underestimated," Miss Marple replied. "Lang thinks he's dealing with a sleepy village full of simple folk. He doesn't know St. Mary Mead as I adore its people. We'll use that to our advantage." She outlined her plan, her voice calm but resolute. Elsie would play a key role, posing as a naive young woman eager to work for Lang. It was a risky move, but Miss Marple had seen how Lang operated. He thrived on flattery and the illusion of control. Elsie's apparent willingness to join his circle would appeal to his ego, giving her access to information that could expose his operations. "And what about Tom?" Raymond asked. "If he's in trouble, we can't just leave him." "We won't," Miss Marple said. "But we must be patient. If Tom is alive, he's likely being held to keep him quiet. We need evidence, something concrete that will force the police to act. Elsie will help us find it." Raymond frowned. "It's dangerous, Aunt Jane. What if Lang suspects her?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Then we shall have to be cleverer than he is. I've dealt with men like Victor Lang before. They always make a mistake, Raymond. It's only a matter of time." The next morning, Miss Marple met Elsie at the tea shop, a bustling hub of village gossip. Over scones and Earl Grey, she coached the young woman in the art of deception. "You must appear eager, but not too eager," she said. "Flatter Mr. Lang, but not so much that he grows suspicious. Let him think he's won you over." Elsie nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I can do it, Miss Marple, for Tom." "Good girl," Miss Marple said. "Now, here's what you'll say." By noon, Elsie had secured a meeting with Victor Lang, arranged through a mutual acquaintance at the fete. She approached the manor house with a nervous smile, clutching a letter of introduction that Miss Marple had carefully crafted. Lang received her in the drawing room, his charm as polished as ever. He offered her tea, his eyes appraising her with a mix of curiosity and calculation. "I hear you're looking for work," he said, leaning back in his chair. "A bright girl like you could do well in my organization. Tell me, what brings you here?" Elsie followed Miss Marple's script to the letter, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Lang listened, his smile widening. He liked what he heard, a young, impressionable girl who could be molded to his purposes. Very well, he said at last. I could use someone like you. Start tomorrow. Elsie left the manor with a job offer and a racing pulse. She hurried to Miss Marple's cottage, where she recounted every word of the conversation. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles never pausing. Well done, my dear, she said. You've opened the door. Now we must see what lies behind it. Over the next few days, Elsie became a fixture at the manor. She overheard snippets of conversations, references to the ledger, the London deal, and the boss's insurance policy. She reported everything to Miss Marple, who pieced the fragments together like a jigsaw puzzle. One evening, as Elsie delivered a tray of tea to Lang's study, she noticed a locked cabinet behind his desk. The key hung on a chain around Lang's neck, a detail she relayed to Miss Marple. That's where he keeps it, Miss Marple said, her voice low. The ledger. It's the key to his empire, his downfall. Miss Marple's walks took her past the manor more frequently now, each one an opportunity to observe. She noticed the same car returning, its driver always carrying a package. She saw lights burning late into the night, and once she glimpsed a figure slipping into the outbuilding with the padlocked door. Her suspicions grew. The manor was not just a hub for gambling, but a nerve center for something far larger. She shared her findings with Raymond. I've spoken to Sir Henry Clithering, she told him one evening. He's discreet, and he trusts my judgment. Elsie can't just steal it. Lang will know it was her. We won't steal it, Miss Marple said. We'll make Lang give it up himself. The plan took shape over the next week, a delicate dance of misdirection and psychology. Miss Marple knew that Lang's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He believed himself untouchable, surrounded by loyal enforcers and a network of secrets. But arrogance bred carelessness, and Miss Marple was counting on that. She instructed Elsie to drop subtle hints about a rival Ganga fictional group she called the Blackthorn Syndicate. Elsie mentioned overhearing rumors at the pub, whispers of men planning to challenge Lang's control. He snapped at his men, checked the locks on his cabinet obsessively, and began making late-night calls to unknown contacts. Miss Marple watched it all unfold, her calm exterior belying the satisfaction she felt. He's rattled, she told Raymond, and a rattled man makes mistakes. One night, as Elsie worked late at the manor, she overheard Lang arguing with the scarred man. I don't care what it costs, Lang snapped. Find out who's behind this Blackthorn nonsense. I want names, and I want them now. Elsie slipped away, her heart pounding, and reported the conversation to Miss Marple. The old lady's eyes gleamed. At Gossington Hall, over tea, she outlined the next phase of her plan. We need a spectacle, she said. A charity gala, perhaps, with Lang as the guest of honor. He won't be able to resist the chance to show off. Exactly, Miss Marple said. But we'll need Sir Henry's help to make it airtight. She asked him to arrange for an undercover officer to attend the gala, posing as a member of the fictional Blackthorn Syndicate. Lang's paranoia would do the rest, leading him to reveal his secrets in a moment of panic. As the village buzzed with preparations for the gala, Miss Marple kept a close eye on Elsie. The young woman was holding up admirably, but the strain was beginning to show. You're doing wonderfully, Miss Marple told her. Just a little longer, and we'll have what we need to save Tom and stop Lang. Elsie nodded, her jaw set. I trust you, Miss Marple. I just hope Tom's all right. He will be, Miss Marple said, her voice firm. We'll make sure of it. The manor house remained a hive of activity, its secrets guarded by Lang's enforcers. But Miss Marple knew that every fortress had its cracks. She continued her walks, noting the routines of Lang's men, the times they came and went, the moments when the manor was left unguarded. She saw the scarred man leave one evening, carrying another package, and followed at a distance. He drove to a nearby town, where he met a man in a dark coat outside a pub. They exchanged the package for a briefcase, and Miss Marple caught a glimpse of bundled cash inside. Blackmail, she thought. It was always blackmail with men like Lang. He used secrets to control people's secrets he kept in that ledger. If she could get her hands on it, the game would be over. Back at her cottage, she pored over her notes, cross-referencing them with Elsie's reports. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. Where was Tom? Was he in the manor, locked in that outbuilding? Or had Lang's men taken him elsewhere? She needed more information, and she needed it soon. One evening, as the gala preparations reached a fever pitch, Elsie came to Miss Marple with a breakthrough. I saw something tonight, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Lang was in his study, and he left the cabinet unlocked for a moment while he took a call. I got a look inside. There's a ledger, just like you said, and a stack of letters. I couldn't read them, but they looked important. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Did anyone see you? No, Elsie said. I was careful, like you told me. Well done, Miss Marple said. Now we know where to strike. That's when Lang will be at his most vulnerable. As Elsie left, Miss Marple sat back in her chair, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. The plan was risky, but she had faith in it and in the people of St. Mary Mead. Lang might think he held all the cards, but Miss Marple was playing a different game, and she intended to win. The days leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of activity. Miss Marple moved quietly among them, offering suggestions and nudging the plans in the direction she needed. Raymond, meanwhile, had taken on the task of keeping an eye on the manor. He reported back with news of increased activity, more cars, more late-night visitors. Lang was nervous, and that was exactly what Miss Marple wanted. She met with Sir Henry Clithering in secret, finalizing the details of the undercover officer's role. He must be convincing, she said. Lang will be looking for any sign of weakness. We need him to believe the Blackthorn Syndicate is real. Sir Henry nodded, his admiration for Miss Marple evident. You're a remarkable woman, Jane. If this works, Lang won't know what hit him. It will work, Miss Marple said simply. It always does when you understand people. The night of the gala arrived, a crisp autumn evening with a full moon casting a silver glow over St. Mary Mead. The village hall was ablaze with light, filled with laughter and music. Victor Lang arrived in a sleek black car, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look every inch the gentleman. He smiled and shook hands, charming the crowd with practiced ease. But Miss Marple, watching from a corner, saw the tension in his eyes, the way his gaze darted to the shadows. Elsie was there too, dressed in a simple but elegant gown, playing her part to perfection. She stayed close to Lang, laughing at his jokes, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. Miss Marple caught her glance and gave a subtle nod. Everything was in place. As the evening wore on, the undercover officer, introduced as a wealthy businessman from London, made his entrance. He was tall, with a commanding presence, and he made a point of speaking loudly about his connections in the city. Miss Marple watched as Lang's smile faltered, his attention fixed on the newcomer. The trap was set now, it was only a matter of time. Chapter 6. The bait is set. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's modest cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. She sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea steaming gently on the side table, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. To an outsider, she appeared the picture of serene domesticity, an elderly spinster lost in her own quiet world. But her sharp eyes, darting occasionally to the window, betrayed a mind in motion, weaving a plan as intricate as the stitches in her hands. The village was abuzz with the usual hum of gossip, but Miss Marple's thoughts were fixed on Victor Lang, the charming yet sinister businessman who had descended upon St. Mary Mead like a wolf in a tailored suit. His illegal gambling ring, whispered about in hushed tones at the tea shop, had already ensnared several locals, including young Tom Carter, whose disappearance, after confronting Lang's enforcers, had sent ripples of fear through the community. Miss Marple's conversation with Tom's sister, Elsie, at the village fete had confirmed her suspicions. Lang's operations were not merely a local nuisance, but part of a broader, more dangerous network. To bring him down, she would need to outwit a man who thrived on cunning and manipulation. Her plan, still forming in its earliest stages, hinged on Elsie. The girl was young, barely 20, with a fierce loyalty to her brother and a quiet strength that Miss Marple recognized immediately. Elsie's desperation to save Tom made her both vulnerable and invaluable, an ideal ally if guided carefully. Miss Marple knew that Lang's greed and arrogance were his weaknesses, and she intended to exploit them by placing Elsie in a position to gain his trust. It was a daring move, one that carried risks, but Miss Marple had seen enough of human nature to know that the boldest plans often succeeded where caution failed. She set her knitting aside and reached for the small notebook she kept tucked in her sewing basket. Flipping it open, she reviewed the notes she had jotted down after her visit to Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall. Dolly's friend, Inspector Hargreaves, had provided tantalizing details about Lang's past, a string of unsolved crimes in London, from extortion to blackmail, all linked to his name but never proven. Lang's ability to evade justice stemmed from his knack for exploiting the powerful, holding their secrets like a sword over their heads. Miss Marple's lips pursed as she read her own neat handwriting. Lang trusts no one, but his ego demands admiration, a weakness to exploit. The clock on the mantel chimed 10, pulling her from her thoughts. She had arranged to meet Elsie at the village tea shop, a neutral setting where they could talk without drawing attention. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, a sensible straw affair with a single rose, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The walk to the tea shop was short, past the vicarage and the post office, where Mrs. Cleary was sweeping the steps and nodding to passers-by. Miss Marple returned the greetings with her usual polite smile, her mind already rehearsing the conversation. Ahead, the tea shop, with its gingham curtains and mismatched china, was half full when she arrived. Elsie sat at a corner table, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea, her eyes darting nervously to the door. She was a slight girl, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid and a face that bore the weight of worry. Miss Marple slid into the chair opposite her, offering a reassuring smile. "Good morning, Elsie," she said softly. "You look as though you've not slept a wink." Elsie managed a weak smile. "I haven't, Miss Marple. Not since Tom went missing. I keep thinking about what he said before he left about owing money to Mr. Lang's people. He was so angry, said he was going to sort it out himself, and now—" Her voice broke, and she looked down at her cup. Miss Marple reached across the table, patting Elsie's hand gently. There, my dear, we'll find Tom, I promise you, but we must be clever about it. Mr. Lang is not a man to be confronted directly. He's too slippery for that." Elsie's eyes widened. "Do you think he's done something to Tom?" "Oh, Miss Marple, I can't bear the thought. Now, let's not jump to conclusions," Miss Marple said firmly, though her tone remained kind. "We need information, Elsie, and I believe you're the one who can help us get it." "Me?" Elsie looked startled. "But how? I don't know anything about Mr. Lang, except that everyone's afraid of him." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice low. "That's precisely why you're perfect for this, my dear. Lang doesn't know you well, which means he won't suspect you. I've seen how he operates. He's charmed half the village with his smiles and donations, but he's always looking for new people to pull into his web. If you were to show an interest in working for him, perhaps as a secretary or assistant, he might let you close enough to learn something useful." Elsie's mouth opened, then closed again. "You mean spy on him?" "Miss Marple, I'm not sure. I could do that. What if he finds out? Tom's already in trouble because of him." "I understand your fear," Miss Marple said, her eyes softening. "And I wouldn't ask this of you if I thought there was another way. But you're clever, Elsie, and brave. I've seen it in you, and I'll be with you every step of the way, guiding you. We'll make sure you're safe." Elsie hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "What would I have to do?" Miss Marple's plan was simple in its outline, but complex in its execution. She explained that Elsie would approach Lang under the pretense of seeking employment, using her brother's debts as a reason for her interest. Lang, she predicted, would see Elsie as an easy, naive young woman he could manipulate. But Elsie, coached by Miss Marple, would play her part carefully, observing everything and reporting back. The goal was to gain access to Lang's inner circle, where evidence of his crimes might be found. "It won't be easy," Miss Marple admitted. "You'll need to be sharp, Elsie, and never let your guard down. But I've known girls like you before, girls who seem quiet but have a core of steel. I believe you can do this." Elsie's expression shifted, a spark of determination flickering in her eyes. "If it'll help Tom, I'll try. But what if Lang doesn't trust me? He's so polished. He seems to know everything." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "That's his weakness, my dear. Men like Lang think they're untouchable because they believe they can read everyone, but they often underestimate people like us, people they think are beneath them. We'll use that against him." Over the next hour, Miss Marple coached Elsie on the finer points of her role. She taught her how to listen without appearing to, how to ask innocent questions that might prompt revealing answers, and how to deflect suspicion with a shy smile. "You must seem eager, but not too eager," Miss Marple advised. "Let him think he's winning you over." Men, like Lang, love to feel they're in control. By the time they parted, Elsie looked more resolute, though her hands still trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll do it, Miss Marple," she said. "For Tom." Miss Marple watched her go, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had set in motion. She had no illusions about the danger Elsie faced, but she also knew that Lang's empire thrived on fear and secrecy. To dismantle it, someone had to step into the lion's den, and Elsie, with her quiet courage, was the perfect candidate. The next step was to arrange an opportunity for Elsie to approach Lang. Miss Marple knew he frequented the Red Lion, the village's only pub, where he held court in the evenings, surrounded by admirers and lackeys. She decided to enlist the help of Mrs. Price, the pub's landlady, who owed Miss Marple a favor after she had discreetly resolved a matter involving a stolen silver tray some years ago. Mrs. Price was a stout, no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for trouble, and she agreed to keep an eye on Elsie during her first encounter with Lang. That evening, Miss Marple sat in her garden, ostensibly reading a novel, but actually keeping watch on the lane leading to the Red Lion. She had instructed Elsie to arrive just after 7, when Lang was likely to be in high spirits, his guard lowered by a glass of whiskey and the adulation of the locals. At precisely 7:15, she saw Elsie's slight figure pass by, dressed in a simple blue frock that made her look younger and more vulnerable than she was. Miss Marple's lips tightened. She hated sending the girl into danger, but she trusted her own instincts and Elsie's inside the Red Lion. The atmosphere was warm and lively, the air thick with the scent of ale and pipe smoke. Victor Lang sat at a corner table, his dark hair slicked back, his suit impeccably tailored. He was laughing at something one of his companions had said, his eyes crinkling with charm, but there was a sharpness to his gaze that never quite softened. Elsie approached hesitantly, clutching a small purse, her expression a carefully crafted mix of nervousness and hope. "Mr. Lang," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Elsie Carter. I was wondering if I might speak with you about a job." Lang's eyes flicked over her, assessing her in an instant. "A job, you say?" His voice was smooth, with a hint of amusement. "And what makes you think I have work for a girl like you?" Elsie swallowed, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "I heard you're a businessman, sir, and I thought, well, my brother's in a bit of trouble, and I need to help him. I'm good with numbers, and I can type. I'd work hard, I promise." Lang leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "Trouble, eh? I might know something about that. Tell me, what kind of trouble is your brother in?" "Miss Marple, of course." Elsie swallowed, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "I heard you're a businessman, sir, and I thought, well, my brother's in a bit of trouble, and I need to help him. I'm good with numbers, and I can type. I'd work hard, I promise." Lang leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "Trouble, eh? I might know something about that. Tell me, what kind of trouble is your brother in?" Miss Marple, of course, was not there to witness the conversation, but Elsie had been well prepared. She mentioned Tom's gambling debts vaguely, enough to pique Lang's interest without revealing too much. She let her voice tremble just enough to seem genuine, her eyes downcast, as if embarrassed. Lang, as Miss Marple had predicted, saw an opportunity. A desperate young woman, eager to please, could be useful, especially one who seemed so harmless, by the end of the evening. Lang had offered Elsie a trial position as a clerk in his import business, a vague term that Miss Marple knew covered his illicit activities. Elsie accepted with a shy smile, promising to start the next day. As she left the Red Lion, Mrs. Price caught her eye and gave a subtle nod, signaling that she would keep watch as promised. The following morning, Elsie arrived at the manor house Lang had rented on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead. It was a grand old place, with ivy-covered walls and tall windows, but there was something cold about it, as if the house itself disapproved of its new tenant. Elsie was ushered into a small office by one of Lang's men, a burly fellow with a scar across his cheek, who introduced himself as Mr. Gibbs. Her task was simple, to sort through invoices and type up correspondence. But Miss Marple had instructed her to keep her eyes open for anything unusual, ledgers or conversations that might hint at Lang's true operations. Over the next few days, Elsie settled into her role, her quiet demeanor and quick work earning her a grudging respect from Gibbs and the other men. Lang himself appeared occasionally, always with a smile and a kind word, but Elsie noticed how his eyes lingered on her, as if testing her loyalty. She reported back to Miss Marple each evening, meeting her in the privacy of the churchyard, where they could speak without fear of being overheard. "He's careful," Elsie whispered one evening, her breath visible in the cool night air. "But I saw something today, a locked drawer in his desk. Gibbs was nervous when I asked about it, said it was private, and there's a room upstairs they don't let me near. I heard voices behind the door, but I couldn't make out what they were saying." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "A locked drawer and a secret room. That's promising, Elsie. But we must be patient. Lang's too clever to leave evidence lying about. We need to wait for him to make a mistake." As the days turned into a week, Elsie's reports grew more detailed. She described coded messages tucked into invoices, names of people she didn't recognize, and sums of money that seemed far too large for a legitimate business. Miss Marple, piecing the information together, began to suspect that Lang's gambling ring was only the surface of his operations. The coded messages suggested blackmail, and the secret room hinted at something even more sinister, perhaps a meeting place for his network of criminals. One evening, as Elsie was leaving the manor, she overheard a conversation between Lang and Gibbs that made her heart race. They were discussing a delivery expected the following night, something valuable enough to require extra security. Elsie relayed this to Miss Marple, who sat silently for a moment, her knitting needles still up. "Delivery," she murmured. "That could be our chance, Elsie, but we must be careful. If Lang suspects you, he won't hesitate to act. I'll speak to Sir Henry Clithering tomorrow. We may need his help sooner than I thought." Miss Marple's next move was to contact Sir Henry, the retired Scotland Yard commissioner who had joined her Tuesday night club in discussing Lang's activities. She invited him to tea at her cottage, where she laid out her plan in full. Elsie's role as an informant was yielding results, but to trap Lang, they needed to catch him in the ACT, preferably in a way that exposed his crimes publicly. Sir Henry, with his connections at Scotland Yard, could ensure that any evidence they gathered would be acted upon swiftly. "I don't like it, Jane," Sir Henry said, stirring his tea. "It's too dangerous for the girl. If Lang gets wind of this, she could end up like her brother or worse." "I know," Miss Marple replied, her voice steady. But Elsie's determined, and she's cleverer than Lang realizes. I've seen her type before, quiet, but with a will of iron. We'll protect her. Henry, I've already arranged for Mrs. Price and a few others to keep an eye on her. And I have an idea for a trap that will force Lang's hand. Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. A trap? You've got that look in your eye, Jane. What are you planning? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Lang loves to be the center of attention. He can't resist a chance to show off his power. I think it's time St. Mary Mead hosted a grand Aventa charity gala. Perhaps something that will draw him out and make him feel invincible. If we play our cards right, he'll make a mistake in front of the whole village. Sir Henry chuckled. You're a devious one, Jane, but it might just work. I'll speak to my contacts at the yard. If you can get us solid evidence, we'll be ready to move. The plan was set in motion. Miss Marple enlisted Dolly Bantry to help organize the gala, knowing her friend's knack for rallying the village. The event would be held in 2 weeks, ostensibly to raise funds for the church roof. But its true purpose was to lure Lang into a false sense of security. Miss Marple instructed Elsie to drop subtle hints to Lang about a rival gang planning to disrupt the gala, knowing his paranoia would make him act rashly. As the days passed, Elsie continued her work at the manor, her nerves fraying but her resolve unshaken. She began to notice patterns in Lang's behavior, his late-night meetings, his cryptic phone calls, the way his men tensed when certain names were mentioned. She memorized every detail, relaying it to Miss Marple, who stored it away, like pieces of a puzzle. One afternoon, while typing a letter, Elsie found herself alone in Lang's office. Gibbs had stepped out, and the manor was unusually quiet. Her heart pounded as she approached the locked drawer she had noticed earlier. She had no key, but Miss Marple had taught her to look for hidden things in plain sight. Running her fingers along the underside of the desk, she found a small Kacha secret compartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in numbers and initials. It was not the ledger Miss Marple hoped for, but it was something a clue to Lang's operations. Elsie slipped the paper into her pocket, her hands shaking. She knew she was taking a risk, but she also knew that Miss Marple was counting on her. That evening, she handed the paper to Miss Marple in the churchyard, her face pale but determined. "It's not much," Elsie said, "but it's all I could find without being caught." Miss Marple studied the paper, her eyes narrowing. "It's more than you think, Elsie. These initials, some of them, match names Inspector Hargreaves mentioned. And the numbers, they could be payments or dates." "Well done, my dear. This is a start." As the gala approached, Miss Marple's plan grew more intricate. She arranged for Sir Henry to bring an undercover officer to the event, posing as a rival gang member. The officer would provoke Lang, not enough to cause a scene, but enough to rattle him. Meanwhile, Elsie would continue her work at the manor, watching for any sign of the mysterious delivery Lang had mentioned. The village buzzed with excitement about the gala, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Miss Marple, as always, remained in the background, her quiet presence unnoticed by most. But her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, anticipating Lang's moves and preparing for every contingency. She knew that the next few days would be critical. If Elsie could find the ledger or uncover more about the delivery, they might have enough to bring Lang down. If not, they would need to rely on the gala to force his hand. As she sat in her cottage that evening, her knitting needles clicking once more. Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. It was the same feeling she had experienced years ago when she had first begun to unravel the secrets of human nature. Lang was a formidable opponent, but she had faced his kind before, men who thought themselves untouchable, only to be undone by their own flaws. She would be ready, and so would Elsie. The bait was set. Now, all they had to do was wait for the trap to spring. Chapter 7. A glimpse behind the curtain. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking softly in rhythm with her thoughts. The village of St. Mary Mead was waking to another ordinary day, its quiet lanes and tidy gardens belying the undercurrent of intrigue that had taken root in Miss Marple's mind. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes fixed on a small notebook where she had jotted down observations from the past few days. The name Victor Lang appeared frequently, underlined with precise strokes of her pen. Elsie's visit the previous evening had been brief but illuminating. The young woman, her face pale but resolute, had slipped into Miss Marple's sitting room under the cover of dusk, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting Lang's enforcers to emerge from the shadows. She had recounted her first foray into Lang's world, a nerve-wracking encounter at the rented manor where he conducted his business. Miss Marple had listened intently, her calm demeanor soothing Elsie's frayed nerves. And now, as she reviewed her notes, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. Lang's operations, Elsie had revealed, were meticulously organized, hidden behind a veneer of legitimate business dealings. The manor, a sprawling Georgian pile on the edge of St. Mary Mead, was ostensibly a private residence leased for the season. But Elsie had glimpsed its true purpose, a hub for Lang's illicit gambling ring. She had described a room filled with green baize tables, where men in sharp suits dealt cards and collected debts with cold efficiency. There were whispers of a hidden safe, a repository for Lang's secrets, and coded ledgers that tracked his profits and the names of those ensnared in his web. Most intriguing was Elsie's mention of a locked study, guarded by one of Lang's most trusted men, where she believed the heart of his operation lay. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, smoothing her skirt as she crossed to the window. The garden was in full bloom, the roses nodding gently in the breeze, but her thoughts were far from the tranquil scene. She had always believed that human nature was the key to unraveling any mystery, and Victor Lang was no exception. His charm, his confidence, his need to control those were the threads she would pull to unravel his empire. But first, she needed more information, and Elsie was her window into Lang's world. The plan was delicate, requiring patience and precision. Miss Marple had instructed Elsie to return to the manor, to play the part of a willing recruit, eager to work for Lang's organization. It was a dangerous game, but Elsie's determination to save her brother, Tom, had made her resolute. Miss Marple had seen that same resolve in countless others over the years, village girls, wronged wives, desperate young men, and she knew how to channel it. She had given Elsie careful instructions: observe, listen, but never push too far. Lang was cunning, and any misstep could put Elsie in danger. As the clock struck 10, Miss Marple heard the familiar crunch of gravel on the path outside. She opened the door to find Elsie, her hat pulled low and a scarf draped loosely around her shoulders. as if to shield herself from prying eyes. The girl's face was drawn, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes, a sign that she had something to share. "Come in, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but firm. "Sit down and tell me everything. Slowly, now every detail matters." Elsie settled into the armchair by the hearth, clutching a small handbag as if it were a lifeline. "I went back to the manor last night," she began, her voice low. "Mr. Lang was there, and he spoke to me himself. He's so charming, Miss Marple, but there's something cold in his eyes, like he's always watching, always calculating." Miss Marple nodded, her expression encouraging, but neutral. "Go on, Elsie. What did he say?" "He asked me about my skills. Said he needed someone reliable to help with his business correspondence. I think he meant typing up letters, but I'm sure it's more than that. He took me to his study, the one I told you about, with the locked door. It wasn't locked this time. I saw a desk covered with papers, and a safe in the corner, hidden behind a painting. It was so quick, I barely had time to look, but I saw him open a ledger, a thick one, and write something in it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained gentle. "A ledger, you say? Did you see what was in it?" Elsie shook her head. "Not clearly. It was full of numbers and names, written in some kind of code. He closed it quickly when he noticed me looking, but I heard him mention a name, Lord Haverford. He said something about keeping him in line." "Lord Haverford," Miss Marple repeated softly, her mind racing. She knew of the man, a minor aristocrat with a reputation for reckless spending. If Lang was blackmailing him, it would explain why the authorities had struggled to touch him. A man like Lang would thrive on the secrets of the powerful, using them as shields against justice. "Did he say anything else?" Miss Marple prompted. Elsie hesitated, then leaned forward. "He asked me to come back tonight. There's some kind of meeting, he said. Important clients. He wants me to serve drinks, but I think it's a test to see if he can trust me." Miss Marple's fingers stilled on her knitting, though she kept her expression serene. "A test," she murmured. "Yes, that sounds like Mr. Lang. He's a man who likes to control the board, to know every move before it's made. You did well, Elsie, but you must be careful. Men like Lang are dangerous when they feel threatened." Elsie nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know, Miss Marple, but if I can get closer, maybe I can find something to help Tom. I have to try." Miss Marple reached out, placing a hand on Elsie's arm. "You will, my dear, but we must be cleverer than he is. Now, tell me everything you saw in that study. Every detail, no matter how small." For the next hour, Elsie recounted her visit to the manor in exhaustive detail, the layout of the rooms, the number of men guarding the entrance, the way Lang's enforcers watched her every move. Miss Marple listened, her mind mapping the manor, as if it were a chessboard, each piece representing a player in Lang's game. The safe, the ledger, the coded messages, they were the keys to his downfall, but they were locked away behind layers of deception and danger. As Elsie spoke, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a case from her youth, a scandal in a neighboring village where a charming conman had swindled half the parish before his greed betrayed him. He had kept meticulous records, too, believing himself untouchable, and it was those records that had undone him. Lang, she suspected, was cut from the same cloth, his arrogance a weakness she could exploit. When Elsie finished, Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes bright with purpose. "You've done splendidly, Elsie. Now, tonight, you must be even more observant. Watch how Lang moves, who he speaks to, what he says when he thinks no one is listening. But above all, stay safe. If you feel the slightest hint of danger, must leave at once." Elsie nodded, her resolve hardening. "I will, Miss Marple, I promise." After Elsie left, Miss Marple returned to her notebook, adding new details with careful precision. The mention of Lord Haverford was a breakthrough, confirming her suspicion that Lang's power stemmed from blackmail. If she could obtain proof, perhaps the ledger itself, she could dismantle his network without risking a direct confrontation. But the safe was a problem. Breaking into it was out of the question. Miss Marple had no knack for lock-picking, and involving others would only complicate matters. No, the solution lay in Lang's own actions. He was a man who thrived on control, and men like that often made mistakes when they believed they held all the cards. The afternoon passed quietly, with Miss Marple tending to her garden and exchanging pleasantries with neighbors who stopped by to chat. To all appearances, she was the same unassuming spinster, her days filled with knitting and gossip. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirl of calculations, piecing together a plan as intricate as the lace she crafted. By evening, she had devised the next step. Elsie's role as an informant was critical, but it was only the beginning. Miss Marple needed to widen the net, to draw Lang into a position where his own actions would betray him. The upcoming charity gala, already in the early stages of planning, was the perfect opportunity. Lang, ever eager to maintain his public image, would be unable to resist attending. If she could orchestrate a scenario that exposed his paranoia, his greed, or his secrets, she might force him into a mistake. She telephoned Dolly Bantry, her voice cheerful but laced with purpose. "Dolly, my dear, about that gala we discussed, do you think we could make it a touch grander? Perhaps invite a few notable figures from London. I have a feeling it could be quite illuminating." Dolly, always eager for a spectacle, agreed. "At once, oh Jane, you do have the most marvelous ideas. I'll speak to the committee and see what we can do." "Anyone in particular you'd like to invite?" Miss Marple hesitated, then mentioned a few names, including Lord Haverford. "It might do him good to get out of London," she said lightly, "and I hear he's fond of a good cause." As she hung up, Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The pieces were falling into place, but the game was far from won. Lang was no fool, and his enforcers were a constant threat. Elsie's safety was paramount, and Miss Marple knew she would need to keep a close eye on the girl's movements. That night, as the village settled into its usual quiet, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting untouched, her thoughts. Village spinsterand that Miss Marple knew would be his undoing. The next morning, Elsie arrived earlier than expected, her face flushed with a mix of fear and excitement. She slipped into the cottage, closing the door quickly behind her, and launched into her account without preamble. "Miss Marple, it was just as you said. He trusts me, or, at least, he thinks he does. I was in the room during the meeting last night. There were men there, important men, not just from St. Mary Mead, but from London, too. They were talking about debts and payments, and something about a shipment coming in next week." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, though she kept her tone calm. "A shipment, you say? Did they mention what it was?" Elsie shook her head. Not exactly. But it sounded important and secret. Mr. Lang was very particular about who should know. He kept looking at one of his men, a tall one with a scar on his cheek, and I think he was giving him instructions without saying it out loud. Miss Marple made a mental note of the scarred man, likely one of Lang's enforcers, and the ledger. Did you see it again? Yes, Elsie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He left it on the desk for a moment when he went to speak to someone. Outside, I didn't dare touch it, but I saw more names and numbers, big numbers. I think it's a record of everyone who owes him money and what he's holding over them. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The ledger was the key, but it was too risky for Elsie to attempt to steal it. Instead, she needed to find a way to make Lang reveal its contents himself, perhaps by exploiting his need to boast. Men like Lang, she knew, could not resist the urge to flaunt their power, especially when they felt secure. "Thank you, Elsie," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been extraordinarily brave. Now I want you to rest today. No more visits to the manor until we've planned the next step. I'll speak to Sir Henry Clithering. He may have some ideas about how we can proceed." Elsie hesitated, her eyes searching Miss Marple's face. "Do you think we can really stop him, Miss Marple? He seems so untouchable." Miss Marple smiled, a quiet confidence in her gaze. "No one is untouchable, my dear. Not when they're driven by greed and pride. We'll find a way together." After Elsie left, Miss Marple spent the day refining her plan. She wrote a letter to Sir Henry, outlining her suspicions about Lang's blackmail schemes and the importance of the ledger. She was careful to keep her tone vague, knowing that any written correspondence could be intercepted. But she trusted Sir Henry to read between the lines. He had worked with her before and knew her methods well. By evening, she received a reply, delivered by a discreet messenger from Gossington Hall. Sir Henry was intrigued and promised to make inquiries with his contacts at Scotland Yard. He cautioned, however, that Lang's influence reached high places, and any move against him would need ironclad evidence. The ledger, he agreed, was crucial, but obtaining it would require careful planning. Miss Marple spent the next few days in a flurry of quiet activity, meeting with Dolly Bantry to finalize details for the gala and exchanging coded messages with Elsie through a trusted neighbor. The girl continued her work at the manor, reporting back with snippets of information, more names from the ledger, overheard conversations about Lang's plans, and a growing sense that he was preparing for something big. The mention of a shipment intrigued Miss Marple, though she lacked the details to act on it. Yet, as the gala approached, Miss Marple's plan took shape. She would use the event to create a controlled chaos, a stage where Lang's paranoia could be manipulated. By planting false information about a rival gang, perhaps through Elsie or another attaché, could push Lang into a public misstep. The presence of Lord Haverford and other potential blackmail victims would add pressure, forcing Lang to act rashly. And if Elsie could locate the ledger during the gala, they might secure the evidence needed to bring him down. The days passed in a blur of preparation, with Miss Marple moving through the village like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. To the outside world, she was merely a kindly old lady, fussing over flower arrangements and charity donations. But to those who knew her, Dolly Raymond, Sir Henry, she was a force of quiet determination, weaving a web that would ensnare a vicious racketeer. On the eve of the gala, Miss Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting once again in her hands. The needles moved steadily, a counterpoint to the storm of thoughts in her mind. Elsie would attend the gala under the guise of helping with the catering, and Miss Marple had arranged for Raymond to keep an eye on her. Sir Henry would ensure an undercover officer was present, ready to act when the moment came. The ledger, the blackmail, the shipman tall were threads in the tapestry she was weaving. And soon, she hoped, they would come together to form a picture that would undo Victor Lang. As the clock struck midnight, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to close the curtains. The village was silent, but she could feel the weight of the coming days. Lang was a formidable opponent, but she had faced his kind before. With Elsie's courage, Sir Henry's resources, and her own understanding of human nature, she was confident they could bring him to justice. The curtain was rising, and the stage was set for the next act in her daring plan. Chapter 8. The trap takes shape. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window of her cozy sitting room in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale pink shawl. The late afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn rug at her feet. To an outsider, she appeared the picture of serene domesticity, but her sharp mind was far from idle. Her thoughts were consumed with Victor Lang, the charismatic yet sinister businessman who had woven a web of deceit and crime around her quiet village. His illegal gambling ring, whispered about in hushed tones at the tea shop and confirmed through Elsie's trembling confessions, was only the surface of a deeper, darker operation. Miss Marple's gentle demeanor belied the resolve that had taken root within her determination to unravel Lang's empire and restore peace to St. Mary Mead. Her plan, now taking shape, was as intricate as the lace she so admired. It relied not on force or confrontation, which were the tools of men like Lang, but on the subtle threads of human nature, greed, pride, and the inevitable mistakes they bred. She had already set the stage by encouraging Elsie to infiltrate Lang's inner circle, a risky but necessary move that had yielded valuable information about his secret ledgers and hidden safe. Now, the next phase of her scheme required precision and the cooperation of trusted allies, chief among them Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard commissioner whose keen mind and discreet connections made him an ideal partner in this delicate operation. Miss Marple's fingers paused mid-stitch as she glanced at the small ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. Sir Henry was due to arrive at any moment, having promised to call after his return from London, where he had been quietly consulting with old colleagues at Scotland Yard. She had impressed upon him the need for subtlety. Victor Lang was no ordinary criminal. His charm and cunning had kept him untouchable for years, slipping through the fingers of the law like water through a sieve. Direct action raids, arrests, or public accusations would only alert him, giving him time to cover his tracks or, worse, exact revenge on those like Elsie who had dared to defy him. No, Lang's downfall required a trap so perfectly baited that he would walk into it willingly, driven by his own arrogance. The faint crunch of gravel outside announced Sir Henry's arrival. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to greet him, her movements slow but deliberate. She opened the door to find him standing on the doorstep, his silver hair neatly combed and his tweed suit impeccable despite the long journey. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of excitement, the kind that only came from the scent of a promising case. "Jane, my dear," he said warmly, stepping inside, "I trust you've been keeping out of mischief since we last spoke." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Mischief, Henry? I'm merely an old woman tending to her garden and her knitting. But do come in. I've just put the kettle on." They settled in the sitting room with cups of tea, the air fragrant with the scent of freshly baked scones that Miss Marple's maid, Cherry, had left on the table. Sir Henry took a sip, then leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I've spoken to my contacts at the yard, as you asked. They're intrigued, to say the least. Lang's name has been on their radar for years. Extortion, blackmail, illegal gambling, but he's always managed to stay one step ahead. They're eager to act, but they agree with you that a conventional approach won't do. He's too slippery." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Precisely. Victor Lang thrives on control and spectacle. He believes himself untouchable because he's mastered the art of manipulating others through fear, charm, or both. But that very confidence is his weakness. We must lure him into a situation where his need to maintain his public image overrides his caution." Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. "And you have such a situation in mind, I presume?" "Oh yes," she replied, her tone almost playful. "A grand event, something he cannot resist attending. A charity gala, perhaps, to benefit the village. Lang will see it as an opportunity to parade his generosity, to solidify his standing among the locals. But we shall use it to expose him not through accusations, but by letting him expose himself." Sir Henry leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're a cunning one, Jane. A gala, you say? It's brilliant, public, festive, and entirely above suspicion. But how do you propose to make him slip?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "By feeding his paranoia. Lang's empire is built on secrets, and he guards them jealously. If we plant a rumor carefully, of course, that a rival is planning to disrupt his operations at the gala, he'll be on edge. His need to assert dominance will cloud his judgment, and when he makes a misstep, will ensure there are witnesses, credible ones, who can testify to his words and actions." Sir Henry set his teacup down, his expression one of admiration tinged with caution. "It's a bold plan, Jane, but risky. Lang's not the sort to take kindly to being outmaneuvered. And what of Elsie? She's already in deep, acting as your informant if he suspects her." Miss Marple's face grew serious. "Elsie's safety is my utmost concern. She's brave, but young and vulnerable. I've instructed her to be cautious, to avoid drawing attention to herself. She's only to observe and report, nothing more. But we must be prepared for Lang to grow suspicious. That's why the gala must happen soon, before he has time to tighten his grip." Over the next hour, they hashed out the details. The gala would be held in the village hall, a spacious venue that could accommodate the entire community. Miss Marple suggested framing it as a fundraiser for the local orphanage, a cause no one, not even Lang, could publicly oppose without raising eyebrows. The event would be advertised widely, with invitations extended to prominent figures in the county, ensuring a crowd of influential witnesses. Sir Henry agreed to liaise with Scotland Yard, arranging for a few trusted officers to attend in plainclothes, posing as guests. One of them, A skilled undercover operative named Inspector Finch would play the role of the rival Lang would be led to confront Dot. As they spoke, Miss Marple's mind raced ahead, anticipating Lang's reactions. She knew his typemen, who thrived on power and adulation, who saw themselves as untouchable kings in their own small kingdoms. She had encountered such men before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond, though rarely with Lang's particular blend of charm and ruthlessness. Her thoughts drifted to a case from her youth, a local squire who had swindled tenants out of their savings while maintaining a facade of benevolence. His downfall had come not through legal action, but through a carefully orchestrated moment of public humiliation when his own boasts revealed his deceit. Lang, she suspected, would fall in a similar way, undone by his need to be seen as invincible. "Henry," she said at last, "we must ensure the gala feels authentic. The village must believe in it, or Lang will sense a trap. I'll speak to the vicar and Mrs. Price Ridley. They're both adept at organizing such events. They'll rally the community without asking too many questions." Sir Henry chuckled. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? Very well, I'll handle the yard and make sure our officers blend in seamlessly. But, Jane, are you certain you want to be so involved? Lang's dangerous, and if he catches wind of your role—" Miss Marple waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Henry, I'm just a harmless old spinster who would suspect me of anything more than a fondness for gossip and knitting. Besides, I've no intention of confronting Lang myself. My role is to pull the strings from behind the curtain." They parted with a plan in place, Sir Henry promising to return in 2 days with confirmation from Scotland Yard. As he left, Miss Marple returned to her armchair, picking up her knitting once more. Her mind, however, was far from the soft wool in her hands. She thought of Elsie, alone in Lang's orbit, and of Tom, still missing after his reckless confrontation with Lang's enforcers. The weight of their safety pressed on her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task ahead. The gala would be the fulcrum on which Lang's fate would turn, and every detail had to be perfect. The following morning, Miss Marple set out for the vicarage, her straw hat tilted against the autumn sun. The village was bustling with its usual rhythm, children playing in the lane, Mrs. Baker sweeping her doorstep, the postman cycling past with a cheerful wave. But beneath the surface, Miss Marple sensed the undercurrent of unease that Lang's presence had brought. The villagers might not know the full extent of his activities, but they felt the shadow he cast, the way his charm masked something darker. The vicar, Mr. Clement, welcomed her warmly, his round face beaming as he ushered her into the parlor. His wife, Griselda, a lively young woman with a penchant for mischief, was already there, pouring tea. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, "what brings you here? Not another scandal, I hope?" Miss Marple smiled, accepting a cup. "Nothing so dramatic, my dear. I was merely thinking how lovely it would be to hold a charity gala for the orphanage. The children could use new books and clothes, and it would bring the village together." Mr. Clement's eyes lit up. "A splendid idea. We've not had a proper event since the summer fete, and with winter coming, the orphanage could certainly use the support." Griselda clapped her hands. "Oh, let's make it grand. A dance, perhaps, with music and lanterns. We could invite everyone, even that charming Mr. Lang. He's been so generous lately." Miss Marple's expression remained. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Oh, What sort of things, Mrs. Price Ridley? The older woman leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Gambling, for one, and worse, blackmail. If you can believe it, my cousin in London says he's mixed up with some very unsavory types. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. How dreadful. But perhaps inviting Mr. Lang to the gala would give us a chance to observe him more closely. After all, he's been so generous in public. It would look odd to exclude him, don't you think? Mrs. Price Ridley huffed, but relented. I suppose you're right, but I'll be keeping an eye on him, mark my words. With the village's key players on board, Miss Marple returned home, satisfied with her morning's work. The gala was set for the following Saturday, giving her just over a week to finalize the details. She spent the afternoon writing letters to Sir Henry, confirming the date and urging him to expedite his arrangements with Scotland Yard, and another to Raymond West, her nephew, asking him to visit and assist with Elsie's safety. Raymond, with his youthful energy and literary flair, would be invaluable in keeping Lang's enforcers at bay should they grow suspicious. That evening, Elsie called at Miss Marple's cottage, her face pale and her hands trembling as she recounted her latest findings. He's planning something big, Miss Marple, she whispered, glancing nervously at the window. I overheard him talking about a deal at the gala, something about a new partner. He's got papers locked in that safe, and he checks them every night. Miss Marple patted Elsie's hand reassuringly. You've done wonderfully, my dear, but you must be careful. Don't linger near that safe, and don't take any risks. We'll handle the rest. Elsie nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. I trust you, Miss Marple. I just want Tom back, and I want Lang stopped, and he will be, Miss Marple said firmly. Now, go home and rest. We've a busy week ahead. As Elsie slipped out into the night, Miss Marple sat back, her mind turning to the gala. She envisioned the village hall aglow with lanterns, the air filled with music and laughter, and Victor Lang striding in, confident and resplendent in his tailored suit. She saw him scanning the crowd, his eyes sharp for any sign of threat, and she saw herself, unassuming, in her corner, watching as the trap she had so carefully laid began to close around him. The days leading up to the gala passed in a flurry of activity. The village buzzed with excitement, every household contributing in some way, baking cakes, stringing lanterns, or rehearsing for the evening's entertainment. Miss Marple moved among them, offering gentle suggestions and deflecting questions. With her usual air of harmless eccentricity, behind the scenes she coordinated with Sir Henry, who arrived on Thursday with Inspector Finch and 2 other officers, all dressed in civilian clothes to avoid suspicion. Finch, a wiry man with a quick smile and sharper eyes, listened intently as Miss Marple outlined her plan to provoke Lang. We'll need you to play the part of a rival, Inspector, she said, her voice low as they met in the privacy of her garden. Nothing too overt, just enough to make Lang think you're encroaching on his territory. A few pointed remarks, perhaps, about his business dealings. He's proud, and he won't tolerate a challenge in public. Finch nodded, his expression one of professional respect. I can manage that, Miss Marple. But what if he doesn't take the bait? Oh, he will, she replied with quiet certainty. Men like Lang can't help themselves. They must always have the last word. By Saturday morning, the village hall was transformed. Garlands of autumn leaves adorned the walls, and tables groaned under the weight of pies, scones, and punch bowls. Griselda had outdone herself, arranging for a local band to play lively tunes, while Mrs. Price Ridley had secured a troupe of amateur actors to perform a short play in Lang's honor. Touch Miss Marple had suggested to stroke his ego. The guest list included not only the villagers, but also several county dignitaries, whose presence would lend weight to any scandal that unfolded as the hour of the gala approached. Miss Marple dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress and her best pearl brooch. She wanted to blend into the crowd, to be just another face among the revelers. Her only concession to the occasion was a new laced shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders. She arrived at the hall early, taking her place near the entrance to observe the guests as they arrived. Victor Lang made his entrance precisely at 8 o'clock, his presence commanding attention. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his smile dazzling as he greeted the vicar and Mrs. Price Ridley. The villagers, unaware of his true nature, applauded warmly, charmed by his generosity and charisma. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the faint tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to the corners of the room. He was alert, she realized, but not yet suspicious. That would come later, when the seeds she had planted began to sprout. The evening unfolded as planned, with music and laughter filling the hall. Elsie, dressed in a modest but pretty gown, moved among the guests, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's briefly to signal that all was well. Sir Henry and Inspector Finch circulated discreetly, their presence unnoticed by all but Miss Marple. As the band struck up a waltz, Lang took to the floor, with Griselda, his charm, on full display. The villagers watched, enchanted, but Miss Marple saw the calculation behind his smile, the way he used every gesture to reinforce his image as a benevolent benefactor. At 9:30, the moment Miss Marple had been waiting for arrived. Inspector Finch, positioned near the punch table, struck up a conversation with a local merchant, his voice just loud enough to carry to Lang's ears. "I hear there's money to be made in St. Mary Mead," Finch said casually. "Gambling, they say. Big profits, if you know the right people." Lang's head turned sharply, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Miss Marple, watching from her corner, felt a thrill of anticipation. The bait had been taken. Now it was only a matter of time, Finch continued, his tone light but pointed. "Of course, it's a risky business. You'd need to be clever to stay ahead of the law. Very clever." Lang excused himself from Griselda and approached Finch, his expression a mask of polite curiosity. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "You seem to know a great deal about local business. Might I ask your name?" Finch smiled, unfazed. "John Harper," he lied smoothly, "just passing through. But I've heard rumors about a certain operation here. Quite impressive, from what I gather." Lang's eyes narrowed, and Miss Marple saw the first crack in his composure. "Rumors can be dangerous," he said, his tone low, "especially when they're spread by strangers." The exchange was brief, but it was enough. The villagers, nearby, had begun to listen, their curiosity piqued by the tension in Lang's voice. Miss Marple nodded imperceptibly to Sir Henry, who moved closer, ready to intervene if needed. But Lang, true to form, recovered quickly, laughing off the encounter, and returning to the dance floor. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, and Miss Marple knew it would fester. As the night wore on, she kept a close eye on Elsie, who had slipped away to the cloakroom, a prearranged signal that she was checking Lang's office, located in a small room at the back of the hall. Miss Marple had learned from Elsie that Lang kept a temporary desk there where he conducted business during village events. If the ledger was anywhere, it would be there, and the Gallus chaos provided the perfect cover for Elsie to search. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching Miss Marple's nerves. She sipped her tea, her outward calm unshaken, but her mind raced with possibilities. What if Elsie was caught? What if Lang's enforcers were watching? She had taken every precaution, but the risk was undeniable. At last, Elsie reappeared, her face flushed but triumphant. She caught Miss Marple's eye and gave a tiny nod, confirming that she had found the ledger. Miss Marple exhaled softly, relief washing over her. The ledger was the Keitha proof of Lang's blackmail schemes and illegal profits. With it in hand, Sir Henry could ensure Lang's arrest, but only if they could get it to him without alerting Lang. The final act of the evening approached, the play in Lang's honor. As the actors took the stage, Miss Marple moved quietly to Sir Henry's side, whispering instructions. Elsie has the ledger. She pass it to you during the performance. When everyone's distracted, take it directly to Inspector Finch. Sir Henry nodded, his expression grave. You've outdone yourself, Jane. If this works, Lang won't know what hit him. It must work, she replied softly. For Elsie, for Tom, and for St. Mary, Mead. The play began, a light-hearted tale of village life that drew laughter and applause from the crowd. Lang sat in the front row, his smile fixed but his eyes restless. Miss Marple watched as Elsie, moving with the grace of a seasoned conspirator, slipped the ledger, a slim, leather-bound book, into Sir Henry's hands. During a particularly raucous scene, he tucked it into his coat, and Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The trap was nearly sprung, but Lang was no fool. As the play ended and the applause died down, he rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping the room. Miss Marple saw his eyes linger on Elsie, then shift to Sir Henry, who was making his way toward the exit. For a moment, she feared he had sensed the net closing around him. She stood, her heart pounding, ready to create a distraction if needed.